As a little kid, I used to really love crossovers. It always made the world of a show feel super big when they took place in the same universe. I used to always love coming up with little storylines that explained how and why the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the ninjas from Ninjago would meet each other, have a cool fight scene, and then fight a big bad guy. This love of crossovers was a gateway to obsessing over Disney XD's Marvel shows. They had these couple of shows: Ultimate Spider-Man, Avengers Assemble, Hulk and the Agents of S.M.A.S.H., Guardians of the Galaxy, and Spider-Man 2017. These shows all took place in the same shared universe, and I was obsessed with them for a while as a kid. I watched the first season of Ultimate Spider-Man the same way any kid my age would, on Netflix, on my Wii, on a CRT TV. So, when the second season came around, I started watching it on Disney XD. I then really started to obsess with all the shows when Avengers Assemble and Hulk and the Agents of S.M.A.S.H. started. I eventually dropped off these shows around season 3 of Ultimate Spider-Man when I started getting into video games after I got a 3DS. It's been a while since then, so I want to look back on these series that were massively formative to my childhood, and where better to begin than with Ultimate Spider-Man. There's a lot of history to recap when talking about Ultimate Spider-Man, because the history of Ultimate Spider-Man tracks the history of all Spider-Man cartoons in general to this point. The first ever Spider-Man cartoon was the 1960s series. You know it, you love it. This series has treated the world to many an enduring meme. It premiered in 1967 and ended in 1970, and there wouldn't be another Spider-Man cartoon for about 11 years. 1981 saw both the premiere of the 1981 Spider-Man cartoon and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. The 1981 cartoon was a pretty regular superhero cartoon for the time. The show was also connected to Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which had Spider-Man and his iconic best friends, Iceman and Firestar. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends had 3 seasons, but it all just amounted to 24 episodes, same number as the 81 show. Apparently, neither of these shows were successful enough to warrant more than 24 episodes, so then came another gap of 11 years between Spider-Man cartoons. 1994 saw the premiere of a new cartoon series for Spider-Man, also just called Spider-Man. Alternatively, is called by fans Spider-Man the Animated Series, or Spider-Man TAS. This series aired on Fox Kids and ran for 5 seasons. However, nothing built can last forever, because in 1996, Marvel Entertainment Group filed for bankruptcy. Spider-Man the Animated Series got 65 episodes, and more episodes were ordered, but then came the rights issues. Another thing that happened around this time was the premiere of a widely known superhero movie. Sadly, this movie was Batman and Robin. Batman and Robin was infamously bad. Its reputation tainted interest in superhero media for a while, until New Line Cinema released Blade, renewing consumer interest. 1999 then saw Marvel auctioning off rights to film and television adaptations of their most popular characters to keep themselves afloat. Fox bought the X-Men and Fantastic Four's film rights, and Sony bought the film and TV rights to Spider-Man. Sony then started making the first movie of the Raimi trilogy, but there was still a bit of a holdout, a series entirely made to fulfill contract obligations with Fox, Spider-Man Unlimited. The first few episodes aired inconsistently in October through December of 2000, and then the series aired more consistently in early 2001. The show failed. It only lasted for 13 episodes. Probably a major reason the show flopped was because they weren't allowed to use anything at all from the comics other than a few characters. The show ended on a cliffhanger. Sony then aired Spider-Man, the new animated series, on MTV in 2003. Initially, it was conceptualized as an adaptation of the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, but it was reworked into something of a follow-up of the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. Peter was in college, and he went to parties that served alcohol. Spider-Man the New Animated Series also flopped. It lasted 13 episodes and was canceled in the same year it premiered. Finally, after the end of the Sam Raimi trilogy, Sony finally managed to make a Spider-Man cartoon that wasn't a total failure, with the premiere of Spectacular Spider-Man Season 1 on Kids WB in 2008. Spectacular Spider-Man is yet another piece of Spider-Man media which Reputation succeeds at, and I don't need to tell you is absolutely goated. However, just like most of the Spider-Man shows, it wasn't fated to last. In 2009, Disney did 2 major things. First, they bought out Marvel. The merger went on through 2010. In that time, Seasons 1 and 2 of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes and Season 2 of Spectacular Spider-Man aired on the brand new Disney XD, after Disney rebranded Toon Disney in that same year that they bought out Marvel. Toon Disney aired many of Disney's iconic shows, and it was changed into Disney XD. Disney intended to change the duality of their 2 channels. Instead of Toon Disney being cartoons and Disney Channel being other stuff, including cartoons, Disney XD was geared towards boys and Disney Channel was geared towards girls. I mainly watched Disney Channel growing up because that's where Phineas and Ferb aired new episodes, so I got hooked on other stuff while I was there. I better add that to the list of reasons why I'm transgender. Hold on. There we go. Sometime before or during the merger with Disney, Sony made a deal with Marvel to give up some of the television rights to Spider-Man in order to make more Spider-Man movies. Spectacular Spider-Man was effectively cancelled because of this, because the rights to make the show still lied with Sony, and Disney saw no incentive to try and pick up the show and give it a proper conclusion when they got the rights to make Spider-Man cartoons back. Disney executives would much rather make a new show they had more creative control over than try and micromanage a revival of a show with rights issues. Ultimate Spider-Man gets a lot of flack for this in places I've seen. People see it as if Disney made this instead of continuing Spectacular Spider-Man when that just isn't true. Spectacular Spider-Man is a victim of circumstance. No matter what direction Disney went in with a new Spider-Man show, they never would have brought Spectacular back. They would have to buy the rights to continue it themselves, along with a whole host of other complications, which is just a decision no entertainment executive would ever have made. Spectacular Spider-Man is a great show, and it getting cancelled sucks, but it's not Ultimate Spider-Man's fault, so let's not bog down this video with thoughts about how the show fails to live up to its predecessor. Ultimate Spider-Man is a series headed by the creative team Man of Action. They created Ben 10, Generator Rex, and Sonic Prime. But they also made Mega Man Fully Charged and Power Players, so whether or not they make bangers isn't really guaranteed. Ultimate Spider-Man's first episode is an interesting start to a show. It speeds through a lot of Spider-Man's origins because pretty much everyone knows them already. The series starts with Peter nearly a year into being Spider-Man. It's a fine choice. Spider-Man is such a popular character that most people already know his origin story, so the show mainly speeds through a lot of introductions. Season 1, Episode 1, Great Power. This episode begins with a news broadcast by J. Jonah Jameson. That's right, Jameson is a newscaster in Ultimate Spider-Man. It's a pretty big departure from his role as the boss of the Daily Bugle and thus Peter's boss, but this is a really good way to keep such an iconic character around when Peter isn't a photographer for the Daily Bugle in this series. In fact, being a newscaster wound up being a common way for Jameson to keep appearing in media where Peter isn't working for him, like his podcast and Insomniac Spider-Man and his role as basically Alex Jones in the MCU. In Ultimate Spider-Man, Jameson is voiced by J.K. Simmons. Simmons' performance in the Raimi trilogy is fantastic. A lot of incarnations since have taken inspiration from Simmons' performance. I'm really glad the crew got him on for this show. With the casting of Jameson, makes me wonder who they got to play Spider-Man. Oh. Oh no. Drake Bell as Spider-Man is certainly a casting choice. He's not awful as a voice for Spider-Man. Out of all the live-action sitcom stars that get cast in this show, and believe me, there are a lot, he's by no means the worst, but he never really rises beyond the point of alright. Really, my biggest problem is that Drake Bell doesn't have, or at least doesn't express, the emotional range that Spider-Man really needs. Drake Bell is a decent actor comedically, and Ultimate Spider-Man is a comedy first and foremost, but he falls flat for very big emotional scenes. I don't think it's a problem with direction. When emotional scenes are happening, Drake Bell just falls behind. Spider-Man swings around on a morning patrol before school, giving exposition about him being bitten by a radioactive spider and such like. Then he encounters a heist of an armored truck. The first villain he fights is the Trapster. The Trapster is played by Steven Weber, notable for playing Jack Torrance in the TV miniseries adaptation of The Shining, and the villain in the first live-action Fairly OddParents movie. Using a D-list character like this is great for the first fight in the series. It makes Spider-Man's world feel a lot bigger when he's fighting a villain that isn't one of his notable rogues. Spider-Man beats Trapster, and the fight ends with the plot hook that Nick Fury wants Spider-Man to join S.H.I.E.L.D. to train under them. He points out that Spider-Man is untrained and needs discipline, and he thinks S.H.I.E.L.D. is the best people to give it to him. Spider-Man caused a lot of collateral damage in this fight with Trapster because he was unfocused and wasn't focused on efficiency. Nick Fury is played by Chi McBride, known for playing Emerson Codd on Pushing Daisies, Detective Laverne Winston on Human Target, and the Priest in Slipping Jimmy. So, full disclosure, Spider-Man does end up joining S.H.I.E.L.D. at the end of this episode, and honestly, it's a weird decision. On the one hand, this direction takes a lot of relatability out of Spider-Man. All of Spidey's tech and other media is made of parts he sourced from dumpster diving because he doesn't have any money. It really shows off how Peter is struggling with problems normal people have. It's part of why Spider-Man is so popular. He's the everyman superhero. Spider-Man joining S.H.I.E.L.D. gives him super tech with no effort on his part, which just takes out the fundamental element of Spider-Man struggling at life. On the other hand, a good thing this does is make a lot of corners of the Marvel Universe more readily accessible for wild stories, which is Ultimate Spider-Man's bread and butter. Peter turns down the offer for now, but takes a brand new high-tech web shooter from Fury and heads to school. He then starts explaining about his personal life with Harry and MJ. Stan Lee plays a recurring role in this series as Stan the janitor at Midtown High. He's not important right now, don't worry. At school, Peter reminisces about meeting Harry and Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn is also voiced by Steven Weber. The following scene shows Norman and his subordinate, Dr. Otto Octavius. This version of Otto Octavius is a scientist with robot arms and some implied form of paralysis working for Norman Osborn, and he's bankrolling the Frightful Four to hunt down Spider-Man. I really like how this makes sense of Trapster's earlier appearance. His role on the team was to plant a tracker on Spider-Man, so he attacked an armored truck just to get his attention. That's a really cool bit of attention to detail. I mean, Trapster didn't even steal anything, so you know his attention was solely on Spidey. Dr. Octopus is voiced by Tom Kenny, notable for voicing SpongeBob in SpongeBob SquarePants, Ice King in Adventure Time, and Sebastian in Beverly Hills Chihuahua 2 and 3. He also voices the Wizard of the Frightful Four. While we're at it, Claw is voiced by Matt Lanter, notable for playing Anakin Skywalker in The Clone Wars, Wyatt Logan in Timeless, and Matt the Pear in the Annoying Oranges TV series. He also voices Harry Osborn and Flash Thompson. Finally is Thundara, voiced by Tara Strong, notable for playing Timmy Turner, Twilight Sparkle, and Batgirl. She also voices Mary Jane Watson. Anyway, the Frightful Four aren't very interesting villains. They show up occasionally throughout the first season as hired goons. The Frightful Four track Spider-Man to Midtown High. They decide to tear up the school until Spider-Man gives himself up. Here's a good place to talk about my two major gripes with Ultimate Spider-Man. This series has a lot of instances where Peter talks to the audience. Every time this happens, the background goes black and white, and Peter stands in front of it. It reminds me of this gag from The Emperor's New Groove, but, not funny.
Now, the main problem area is up here. All of this going on up here is what's causing me the most physical discomfort. It's like a visceral reaction of discontent coming from this area. This area is not good either. I hate this, but I'm mainly worried about this.
The direct talking to the audience can get really grating. It grinds the pacing to a halt when most of the stuff could very easily be put over at least something happening. Peter's inner monologue is very prominent in the comics, and I think this is supposed to be a stand-in for that, but in the comics, it's not super direct at the audience. What's worse about these pauses, though, are the way it sets up cutaway gags. This show has a lot of cutaway gags. They undercut a lot of funny quips by dragging them out. The whole point of Spider-Man's quips is that they're quick. Meanwhile, this show often takes them and uses them as setups for cutaway gags. The pauses also set up cutaway gags a lot of the time, and the cutaway gags just aren't funny. Man of Action is clearly a lot better at writing funny dialogue than cutaway gags. Ben 10 is a clear example of this. The show would be 100% better without cutaway gags, but they persist nonetheless. So, Peter fights the Frightful Four, but Harry Osborn gets injured in the attack, making Spider-Man realize that Nick Fury really was right. Today is also Uncle Ben's birthday, which is just further driving that point home for Peter. The episode then ends with Spider-Man set up to join S.H.I.E.L.D. This episode was an alright introduction. I'm going to rank each episode on a tier list as the show goes on, and this episode is B tier. Season 1, Episode 2, Great Responsibility. This episode begins with Spider-Man fighting some robots in an initiation test. The test is a pretty basic fight scene against robots, which there are going to be a lot of throughout this series, but more importantly, this cutaway gag confirms that not only does Peter have a Wii, but a superhero fighting game exists in this universe where you play with the Wii remote vertically. Not even with the nunchuck. The initiation is being absorbed by S.H.I.E.L.D.'s team of young heroes. We'll meet them later. Anyway, look at this animation of Peter on his web parachute. Honestly, this introduction to S.H.I.E.L.D. is weirdly paced. Peter passes the initiation test and then learns how his web parachute works by dropping out of the helicarrier, and that's just unimportant. The rest of the initiation happens the next day, and that's just unnecessary. There's a scene with Norman on the phone with Otto, which just could have been at any time in the episode, and a scene with Harry at the hospital and Peter at Midtown High, which honestly both could have been cut. Spider-Man gets introduced to the research and development lab at S.H.I.E.L.D. and meets Dr. Kurt Connors with his iconic 2 working arms. He's voiced by Tom Kenny. It's going to be a running trend that a lot of Spider-Man's iconic characters are more closely related to S.H.I.E.L.D. We also meet Phil Coulson, voiced by his MCU actor Clark Gregg. Clark Gregg is mostly known for playing Coulson. He's of course played the character in the MCU, reprised his role in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as a main character, showed up in a couple of episodes of Marvel What If, and even voiced him in LEGO Marvel Superheroes 1 and LEGO Marvel Avengers. The first big project I found that had Coulson in it and didn't have him played by Clark Gregg was LEGO Marvel Superheroes 2. That was recorded during the video game's voice actor strike, which led to a lot of recasting to use actors who aren't from the US. Coulson is pretty upset by Spider-Man joining S.H.I.E.L.D. He sees all of his faults that Nick Fury wants to fix by having him join S.H.I.E.L.D. as problems that would make him a danger to S.H.I.E.L.D. Peter then goes around on the motorcycle Dr. Connors gave him for a bit, and we get introduced to the team. There's Ava Ayala, aka White Tiger, Sam Alexander, aka Nova, Danny Rand, aka Iron Fist, and Luke Cage, aka Power Man. Luke gave himself a superhero name on the spot. I'll go in order describing how weird this whole fucking team comp is. First, we have White Tiger. Out of the entire team, she makes the most sense to be here. This is a team of teen heroes. White Tiger was known in the comics as a young hero, albeit as a young adult and not a teen, but aging her down makes sense here. She was a student at Avengers Academy. She makes the most sense to be here out of anyone. This unnamed S.H.I.E.L.D. team for young heroes is a good place for her. She's played by Caitlin Taylor Love. She played a main character on the Disney XD sitcom I'm in the Band, and this is her first voice acting role. Nova is in a similar situation in 3 ways. In the comics, Sam Alexander is a kid superhero who took his Nova helmet from his dad. He was trained by Rocket and Gamora of the Guardians of the Galaxy. His voice actor, Logan Miller, was also a cast member of I'm in the Band, though he has more acting experience in general. He played Johnny on Phineas and Ferb. Remember Johnny, Vanessa's ex-boyfriend? Of course you don't. Logan Miller took over the role after John DiMaggio voiced him in this first appearance, and was most likely too busy for later appearances. It's likely that because of their experience with Disney XD, Logan Miller and Caitlin Taylor Love got these roles in Ultimate Spider-Man. A lot of Disney's on-screen actors have ended up voicing stuff in Disney animated projects. For example, Christy Carlson Romero from Even Stevens voiced Kim Possible. Ashley Tisdale was in Zack and Cody in High School Musical and voiced Candace in Phineas and Ferb, and there are several others that you're going to see throughout the series. The third thing these two characters have in common is that they appeared in Ultimate Spider-Man not long after their debut in the comics. Since a cartoon episode takes over a year to produce, White Tiger and Sam Alexander's Nova would have been added to the show while the comics they were introduced in were in early development. Sam Alexander was introduced in Point 1 Volume 11 in November 2011. This comic is essentially an anthology that exists as the memories of the Watcher. This is the first appearance of Sam, but he wouldn't get a proper introduction until over a year later in February 2013 with the first issue of his own series. Similarly, Ava Ayala's first appearance was in Avengers Academy number 20 in October 2011. Ultimate Spider-Man premiered April 1st of 2012, which means that Man of Action would have been given access to plans for these new characters for one reason or another in production. Most likely cross-promotion. Well, it's definitely cross-promotion. A big piece of evidence for this is that these two have entirely different designs from their appearances in the comics. Like, Sam has a gold Nova helmet instead of his black helmet in the comics, and Ava's costume has light gray stripes instead of black stripes. Then we have Iron Fist and Power Man. It makes sense putting these two together at least, even if they don't make sense to be here in specific. They're an iconic duo, they're the heroes for hire. What's weird is that they're aged down into teenagers and are members of the main cast. It's a really weird decision. Historically, these characters are both adults in the comics. I feel like the goal in the selection of characters was to put together a team that had a variety in terms of superpower and personality held to the place they had in the comics. Also cross-promotion. Danny Rand is voiced by Greg Cipes, a very prolific voice actor known for playing Beast Boy in Teen Titans, Michelangelo in Ninja Turtles 2012, and Steve Jackson in Fish Hooks. Luke Cage is voiced by Ogie Banks, another prolific voice actor, known for playing Omoi and Darui in Naruto, Claude Wolf in Monster High, and Scooter in the Muppet Babies reboot. Peter rejects this new team and storms off, but Nick Fury tries to give him a pep talk, and... Peter leaves only to get ambushed by these clowns again. They got him on the ropes only for the team to come in and save him, teaching Spider-Man a valuable lesson about teamwork. Doc Ock watches a news report by Jameson with Norman, and the fucking detail on this mouth animation, holy shit. The status quo is now established as Peter's team joins him at Midtown High, and Coulson is the new principal. This episode is a good example of a recurring thing in this series where episodes that have a lot of action sequences are hard to summarize. If I go through a fight beat for beat, that's gonna get boring really quickly. So often, I'm gonna just say the outcome of a fight scene unless a specific beat during the fight is important. I'd say this episode is B tier. It's above the first episode because I enjoyed getting into detail about all these actors and the history of the characters. Season 1, Episode 3, Doomed. This episode begins with Peter being upset by the shakeups brought by the team now being at Midtown High. Chief among these concerns is them pulling him away from time with his friends. Peter's the only member of this team who cares intently about his personal life and separating it from his life as a superhero. It's not acknowledged until the season finale, but the team all live on the Helicarrier and don't really have social lives or lives in general outside of S.H.I.E.L.D. Literally every member of the team is an orphan. Sam is firmly established as Peter's Lancer by purposefully doing everything in his power to get on Peter's nerves. This episode focuses a lot on these two bickering. They're so intent on bickering that they don't pay attention to the goal of the training exercise they drag to after school, and instead compete to blow up robots rather than actually accomplishing the objective. Fury then punishes them all by making them clean up the debris. Anyway, this transition just killed me. The editing in this show is wild. Ava decides that the team should prove themselves to Nick Fury by taking down a bad guy, and Sam logically concludes that the best one to go after is Dr. fucking Doom. The team is a lot less active in trying to stop Nova than they should be, as they hijack a jet to go to Latveria. Naturally, Doom's robots attack, and Doom himself shows up. Dr. Doom is voiced by Maurice LaMarche, known for playing Rain in Pinky and the Brain, Calculon in Futurama, and the large burp sound effect in Elf. The team actually managed to knock Dr. Doom out, and Peter and Sam argue over who deserves the glory of being the one to take in Dr. Doom. They fly back and present him to Fury, only for Doom to reveal that it's a ruse for a Doombot to invade the Helicarrier. A major thing about Dr. Doom in the comics is that he has a ton of robot replicas of himself that handle his dirty work. If you ever think Dr. Doom is in dire straits, it's gonna be revealed eventually that it was a Doombot. And this Doombot is a Russian nesting doll of Doombots, because of course it is. The team chases down the Doombots across the Helicarrier and learn a lesson about teamwork. This is really repetitive of episode 2. It would have been a lot better if the plot focused more on the team taking on a more grounded conflict. Taking on Dr. Doom in episode 3 doesn't really serve as a great introduction to these characters working together. I'd put this episode in C tier. The absurdity of the concept would potentially elevate the episode, but it just kind of falls flat as a demonstration of these characters. The episode just tries to do too much at once. Season 1, Episode 4, Venom. This episode begins with a drone sent by Doc Ock attacking Spider-Man for his blood. It chases him through a subway tunnel, and the bot gets hit by an oncoming train, only for it to dispense a tiny robot from the wreckage to get the blood back to Octavius. The next day at school, Peter has to flake on Harry because his team is being entirely inconsiderate. Why they dragged him away in this scene isn't even elaborated on. It's literally just there for Harry to start angsting over his friend not being available to make plans for movie night. Cut to Doc Ock's underground lab, where Octavius gets a sample of blood, and it takes him almost exactly 15 seconds to turn the sample into the Venom symbiote. Yes, in this series, instead of being an alien, Venom is an experiment made by Dr. Octopus out of Spider-Man's blood. This is sort of an example of Ultimate Spider-Man the Animated Series, taking inspiration from the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. In the Ultimate Comics, Venom was an experiment by Richard Parker and Eddie Brock Sr., and the sample was later discovered by Eddie Jr., leading to the Black Suit arc and eventually Venom. Ultimate Spider-Man has a tendency to just do whatever it wants when it adopts a concept from the comics. It's both a detriment and a strength at points. I personally feel alright about this direction for Venom. It was my first exposure to the concepts because I watched this show at a young age, but I'm still fond of it. So, Peter bickers with the team about them tearing him away from Harry, and then Peter decides to bring them to movie night, with Ad asking Harry about it. Yeah, Peter's judgment isn't very good. Norman's out of the house that night to attend an evil business meeting, where the symbiote is revealed to have broken out to find Spider-Man. The team gets to Harry's movie night, and they find out that Harry instead is throwing a party just to spite Peter. He invited half the school just to say fuck you. Wow. Peter uses the bathroom only to find Flash, and for Venom to find him. Venom hooks onto Flash and chases Peter around the house. Venom terrorizes the party, the heroes change into costume, and get chased up to the roof by Venom. Venom proceeds to play hot potato with hosts. Nova gets venomed, Power Man gets venomed, Spidey figures out one of Venom's principal weaknesses, and Iron Fist gets venomed. White Tiger is excluded from the venoming. Finally, we get the first appearance of Venom, as it takes over Spider-Man. I really like this sequence where Spider-Man is fighting Venom trying to take him over. It's really well animated. The team manages to get rid of Venom. Harry then finds a bit of Venom and puts it in a bottle while he and Peter clean up. This episode is also C tier, but below episode 3. The bickering between the team makes it really drag in the first half. Season 1, Episode 5, Flight of the Iron Spider. This episode starts with a fight against the Living Laser. I kinda like how Ultimate Spider-Man uses lesser-known characters as antagonists for episodes. It makes the universe feel a lot bigger when they use bit players. Living Laser is played by Keith Sarabaija, known for playing Herschel Biggs in LA Noire, Harbinger in Mass Effect, and Wolverine in the Ultimate Spider-Man video game. Nova makes a joke about wikis. Pretty pog. The Living Laser runs away as Iron Man shows up. Iron Man is voiced by Adrian Pastar, known for playing Charles Piper in Top Gun and a bunch of other roles I couldn't make a joke out of. This isn't his first time voicing Iron Man. He voiced him both in the dub of the Marvel anime and then voiced him in LEGO Marvel Superheroes, Disney Infinity, and some other shows in the Disney XD universe. To show Peter being starstruck, we see these horrifying cartoon Iron Man angels. We see a montage of cutaway gags, and again, I have to emphasize how much this kills the pacing of the series. So Spider-Man gets an invite to Stark Research and Development Lab. We get a tour of the lab. This episode has a lot of cutaway gags, like this one about different dimensions from the particle accelerator. Spider-Man gets his hands on the Iron Spider suit as a gift from Tony. Spider-Man spends a week entirely self-absorbed about his new suit and ends up totally botching the rematch with the Living Laser. As the team walk away, the Living Laser hijacks the Iron Spider. It really makes me upset how dysfunctional the team is with Peter in it. Every episode far has had drama of the team as the main driver of conflict, and it's just really tedious. Living Laser then fights with Iron Man. He threatens Peter, and Stark lowers his defenses so Living Laser will spare him. Spider-Man and Iron Man manage to get the Living Laser out of the armor and put him in the particle disassembler to get rid of him, and he goes to the universe of the Superhero Squad show. The Iron Spider is then set up as just a thing Peter has and doesn't use. Yet another episode about the team bickering. I really like Adrian Pastar's performance as Iron Man, so it brings this episode up to a C tier. Season 1, Episode 6, Why I Hate the Gym. This episode begins with Spider-Man chasing down Batroc the Leaper. The lore here is really fun. Batroc is such a low-tier villain that Shield's file on him is bare bones. Batroc the Leaper is voiced by Rob Paulsen, notable for voicing Yakko Warner and Pinky in the Animaniacs, Ditto in Ben 10, and Lego George Lucas and Lego Star Wars The Padawan Menace. Octavius spies on Spider-Man through security footage as he fights Batroc, along with a mercenary he hired, Taskmaster. Taskmaster is voiced by Clancy Brown, and it's just perfect casting. Clancy Brown is notable for voicing Mr. Krabs in SpongeBob SquarePants, Lex Luthor in the DC animated universe, and the Regurgitator. I just really love Clancy Brown's performance as Taskmaster. White Tiger shows up during the fight, and Taskmaster studies the video of Spider-Man and White Tiger causing a lot of unnecessary damage to catch Batroc.
Do you have any idea how much it costs to repair a water tower? It's a lot.
The next day at Midtown High, everyone shows up to some sort of assembly in the lunchroom where Coulson is talking about how it's suspected Spider-Man may be at the school. The gym teacher is out sick due to injury, and this whole sequence is hysterical. Taskmaster sets up a spring-loaded trap to injure the gym teacher so he can be a substitute teacher to infiltrate Midtown High. There is no textual evidence to suggest that this isn't canon. Taskmaster puts up an obstacle course and uses his photographic reflexes to figure out who Spider-Man is by how they move. I like how this episode emphasizes an interesting aspect of how Peter keeps his secret identity, being that he avoids looking physically capable at all. He lets himself get beat up, and he pretends to be bad at gym class so people don't catch on to him being Spider-Man. This episode of Taskmaster is a pretty interesting way to explore this. Another weird thing about this scene is how Taskmaster selected girls for the test to find out who Spider-Man is. Taskmaster did this obstacle course under the guise of mandatory tryouts for some sports contest or the like. So callbacks happen during the day on Saturday. Ava gets suspicious when the supposed callbacks for the unnamed sports thing run long. Extracurriculars taking a while isn't anything special, but the security system is also on high alert, so Ava and Peter suit up to check it out. Thus proceeds the establishment of Taskmaster's powers through a fight scene across the school. Taskmaster copies our hero's moves, and he chases Spider-Man into a trap. He wants to double-cross Octavius by offering Spider-Man a job, and Spider-Man doesn't even ask what he wants before rejecting him. Taskmaster talks about how he used to work for S.H.I.E.L.D. and waxes about how Spider-Man shouldn't trust Nick Fury. The only reason Peter doesn't shut up Taskmaster right here is to try and give a distraction for Ava. They realize that Taskmaster is fighting them based on photographic reflexes, so they mix up the fighting style on him. They lure him into the gym and turn off the lights to fight him in the dark, and counter his photographic memory by moving stuff around while he can't see. Spider-Man and White Tiger beat Taskmaster, but he flees, leaving behind a rubber mask of his face shown early in the episode. This episode really shows off what I think works about this series. When it's not focusing on cutaway gags, it can be really good. The character writing and action are the series' strong suit. Once again, Clancy Brown as Taskmaster is perfect, and the episode is just plain fun. Straight up S tier. Season 1, Episode 7, Exclusive. In this episode, Spider-Man is being interviewed by Mary Jane Watson. That's the framing device for this entire episode. It's just first-person camera footage. The interview gets interrupted by a rampaging Hulk. Hulk is voiced by Fred Tatasciore. He's known for playing Buff Frog in Star vs. the Forces of Evil, multiple recurring characters in Chowder, and the Emperor in Planet Sheen. Fred Tatasciore voiced Hulk in both Earth's Mightiest Heroes and Wolverine and the X-Men, and went on to voice him for a lot of Marvel projects. Honestly, this episode is pretty unremarkable. For a while, Spider-Man fights Hulk, who seems to be causing senseless destruction, when in reality, Hulk is fighting an invisible monster made of energy. For some reason, it takes a while for Hulk to just straight up try and punch the problem, and even longer for the electricity villain to drain electricity to become more powerful. These seem like plot beats that would happen really soon, but they just take a while to happen in the episode. Eventually, they drop water on Energy Guy, and he runs into the subway. Then S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up, fights the Hulk, and the helicarrier crashes because of the Energy Man. The plan then becomes to give Energy Man all the electricity they can give him until he pops.
Yeah, why don't you just drop a car battery on her head? Car battery!
Literally, the only thing you need to know from this episode is that MJ got noticed by J. Jonah Jameson, so she has a job opportunity at the Daily Bugle, and that's one of her goals, but that comes in at the beginning of another episode, so it's entirely unnecessary to watch this one. This episode has got to be the first D-tier episode. D-tier is going to be mostly episodes that offer nothing of substance. This episode was entirely skippable. Season 1, Episode 8, Back in Black. In this episode, Peter is sick. First off, this is a dumb gimmick. It makes the tone way too goofy. Drake Bell doesn't even stick to doing the sick voice for half his lines. So while he's sick, he sees Spider-Man on the news. We're sorta getting the black suit arc, but with Harry in the suit instead of Peter. I really like this concept. Harry as Venom is a fun shakeup to the traditional Spider-Man stuff, and this series is the first to do it. One major gripe I have with this episode is how it goes through the motions of this stock plot of new guy in town. Main character is suspicious of new guy, other main characters don't take them seriously, and new guy looks good for a while, until main character is proven right in the end. This is a really tedious stock plot for an episode of TV, and I just think they could have done better. Like, it's just played really straight, and I just don't think that works very well with these characters. Harry reveals the secret of being the other Spider-Man to Peter, but that doesn't feel like it goes anywhere. Honestly, this episode is just the least interesting version of the plot that it presents. The team distrust Peter for no real reason, and just bringing them in to have friction with no payoff is grating. These same plot beats with the team distrusting Peter could have worked great in the first part of a two-part episode, but it just feels disconnected when this episode is episode 8 and the episode that continues its storyline is episode 11. If this was a two-part episode, the faults of the first part would feel a lot more warranted. Anyway, this episode ends with Peter defeating Venom for a bit. This episode is at the bottom of D tier. Season 1, Episode 9, Field Trip. There's a field trip at Midtown High, and Peter is not enthused. The team and some assorted Midtown characters are at the museum in an exhibit that focuses on Asgard. Danny reads out an inscription, and a frost giant appears. The team struggles against the giant until Thor appears and handles it easily. Thor is voiced by none other than Travis Willingham, known for playing Knuckles the Echidna from Sonic Freeriders to Forces, Lego Superman, Grog Strongjaw in Vox Machina, and Lex Luthor, specifically in Lego Dimensions. Travis Willingham then proceeded to voice Thor in a lot of different Marvel projects, like the Lego games, Disney Infinity, and the Thor the Dark World iOS game. Then Loki comes in and turns Thor into a frog with the Norn Stone. Loki is voiced by Troy Baker. He is also a mainstay for his role as Loki in Marvel animation video games. He voices Lego Batman in the Lego games and specials, and the Joker in a lot of other Batman media, including TV series and straight-to-DVD movies, and both the Joker and Batman in the Batman and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles crossover movie. Thor then takes the team to Asgard to fight Loki, only to get ambushed. They then get weapons from Eitri that all clearly state their character flaws, and they beat Loki and turn Thor back. This episode was really ham-fisted. Every episode that the team appears in so far, there's just nonstop arguing, and it's irritating like clothes full of hair trimmings. Call me spoiled by better shows, but I like it when a team of characters actually like hanging out with each other. The weapons in the third act are sloppy plot devices to imply character development where there is none. There are a couple more interesting episodes later that involve Thor and Loki, but this episode is still ultimately skippable because those episodes briefly recap this episode's events. This episode is D tier. Season 1, Episode 10, Freaky. This episode begins with Spider-Man fighting the mutant supervillain Mesmero. He controls minds and is using this power to rob stores and make civilians attack Spider-Man. Mesmero is voiced by Dwight Schultz, known for playing Dr. Animo in Ben 10, Mung Dahl in Chowder, and Mr. Mixie as Pitlick in Superman Returns the video game. He also voiced the Vulture in the Spider-Man 1 and 2 games and Insomniac Spider-Man, as well as Kraven in Web of Shadows. On the PlayStation 2! Wolverine then comes in. Wolverine is voiced by Steve Blum, notable for playing Spike Spiegel in Cowboy Bebop, Vilgax in Zaskare in Ben 10, and King Nixel in Mixels. Steve Blum has been a very prolific voice actor for Wolverine. He first voiced him in the short-lived series Wolverine and the X-Men, then in Superhero Squad Show, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, multiple X-Men video games, Spider-Man Web of Shadows, the Deadpool video game, LEGO Marvel Superheroes, and Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3. So Wolverine shows up, does the old crossover heroes fight for a bit routine until he sniffs out Mesmero. Wolverine threatens Mesmero to release the civilians, but Mesmero subtly uses his powers to make Wolverine and Spider-Man swap minds. From what I could find, Mesmero has never had the power to switch minds in the comics, and he does it multiple times in this show. There's a delayed reaction with the body swap, and Peter and Wolverine switch bodies while Peter is at school the next day. Wacky wacky! Half of this episode is mostly just a fight and then a chase involving Sabretooth, and once again, it's not a lot to comment on. After a lengthy fight scene of Sabretooth, they confront Mesmero, who switches them back. This episode is honestly really boring. None of the events really lead into each other, it's just a lot of things happening. It sounds really fun in concept, but it goes nowhere. This episode also puts into perspective how Drake Bell is just a really lacking voice actor. As Drake Bell voices Wolverine in Peter's body, he just puts on a bit of a deeper, more gravelly voice. Meanwhile, Steve Blum perfectly sells being Spider-Man trapped in Wolverine's body. This episode is super frustrating to watch and is extremely skippable. Bottom of D tier. Season 1, Episode 11, Venom Attack. This episode starts with a very similar song and dance to Back in Black. A suspiciously quiet Spider-Man confronts and brutalizes Batroc the Leaper, and Peter sees it on the news. Okay, brace yourself now, because J.K. Simmons delivers the best joke in the entire series.
That wall-crawling menace has finally gone too far. Violating this individual's civil rights, policemen aren't allowed to resort to violence.
Peter is very adamant about facing Venom alone, to the point of sabotaging his team when Fury sends them after Harry. But after an honest confrontation, Peter finally opens up to them. So the team fights Venom while Peter works on making an anti-Venom. Not the symbiote, just a serum to help Harry fight Venom. The show itself also points out that Peter being a scientific genius takes a major backseat in the series so far. All of his tech comes from S.H.I.E.L.D. now, so a lot of initiative for problem solving is offloaded, so we finally get to see this side of him in the series. Venom is taken down and Peter gives Harry the anti-Venom. Norman Osborn then steals a fucking blood sample from a hospital and gives it to Doc Ock. This doesn't come up again until the season finale. Unfunny joke, episode ends. This episode is pretty good. I like the team getting along for once in this show's miserable runtime. But honestly, to put it in a less cynical way, I like how Peter and the team feel more like friends in this episode. Peter having friends he can confide in as both a superhero and himself is probably the most interesting thing about this series, and I like that we actually get this in this episode. B tier. Emotional openness, that's a B tier ranking. Season 1, Episode 12, Me Time. This episode begins with Peter getting the house to himself for a weekend. While partying, Peter finds a S.H.I.E.L.D. camera in his house. Just has their insignia right there. Peter is upset about it on top of a lot of things like excessive training, and Fury remarks about him signing off on it. This is a setup for a recurring unfunny joke about a jetpack. I don't like how this makes Peter look like an idiot. Moving on, I guess. Peter decides that he is done with S.H.I.E.L.D. and turns off his communicator. On a similar note, Norman is ready to kill Octavius for not having any results about anything to do with Spider-Man yet. I love how this episode focuses on both the hero and the villain being cut off from all their resources. This leads to the second and third acts being a fight between Peter and the newly dubbed Dr. Octopus. This is the first of many episodes where Tom Kenny really gets to flex in his vocal performance. I absolutely love it. This episode just gets a ton of stuff right, especially in the proper introduction of one of Spider-Man's greatest enemies. This episode has a lot of fight scenes, so I don't have a lot to comment on directly because I don't want to summarize fight scenes beat for beat. There is this fight in the Hall of Mirrors. A fight like this is a common trope of fights with Mysterio, but Mysterio doesn't show up in this series until the final season, strangely enough. Anyways, the episode ends with Doc Ock going into hiding after failing Norman for the last time. All in all, this episode is a pretty great way to make Doc Ock a driving force in the show. Tom Kenny's take on the character is great, and we really get to see a lot of that in this episode. His performance elevates every scene he's in at least a little. A-tier episode. Season 1, Episode 13, Strange Days. In this episode, Peter wakes up from a weird dream to find that the whole city is asleep except for him and Danny. Something is putting the whole world to sleep right now, trapping them in nightmares. Danny just barely managed to shield himself and Peter from the magic, so they go to Doctor Strange for some help to figure out the situation. A detail I appreciate is that Peter's all skeptical about magic existing for about a minute before he just shuts up and accepts it. Doctor Strange is voiced by Liam O'Brien, known for playing Vax'il Don in Vox Machina, Gaara in Naruto, and Supply Master Yogar List in Star Wars Rebels. Doctor Strange brings everyone into the dream dimension to fight Nightmare, who's causing all the sleep. The whole episode then revolves around fighting Nightmare, and it's a lot of fun. Nightmare is voiced by Mark Hamill, notable for playing Luke Skywalker, the Joker in Batman the Animated Series, among other shows, and Breakneck on Turbo Fast. This episode has a lot of fight scenes, and again, they're hard to summarize in an engaging way. Nightmare throws illusions at Danny and Doctor Strange to discourage them. Danny fights against an illusion of Shao Lao, the dragon he fought to gain his power, but is discouraged by Nightmare's mockery. Also, I don't know if Shao Lao is the proper pronunciation. That's the way the show pronounced it, so I'm going with that. The same thing happens to Doctor Strange, where his sorcery just turns into magic tricks, which I think is probably the least interesting insecurity you could dig up about Doctor Strange. Then, when Nightmare tries throwing Peter's insecurities at him, it doesn't work. It's legitimately something brilliant. Earlier in the episode, Peter sets up a cutaway gag about Uncle Ben doing magic tricks, but it just ends up being heartwarming reminiscing instead of a joke. So Nightmare summons an apparition of Uncle Ben, hoping to draw on Peter's greatest insecurities like he did with everyone else, but instead, Peter walks up to Uncle Ben and makes conversation. Nightmare is surprised by this, and Peter explains, yeah, he knows Uncle Ben's death is his fault, but he's come to terms with that. It's why he's Spider-Man. Peter then realizes that the only power dreams have is the power you give them, so he causes everyone to wake up by just saying, "It's a dream! Wake up!" Nightmare is defeated. Also, Uncle Ben is voiced by Greg Grunberg. He played Temmin Wexley in Star Wars. This episode was such a pleasant surprise. I was already super frustrated by the show's cutaway gags, so it was a nice experience to have something wholesome for a change. The rest of the episode is pretty underwhelming, but that moment is really good. B tier. Season 1, Episode 14. Awesome. This episode begins with Spider-Man fighting a rampaging Juggernaut. Peter has to complete a science fair project on the day of because he procrastinated, and he tries to figure out something while fighting Juggernaut. Peter elects to steal something from S.H.I.E.L.D. to pass it off as his project. Juggernaut is voiced by Kevin Michael Richardson, known for voicing Robert Hawkins in Static Shock, Shredder in 2012 Ninja Turtles, and Jabba the Hutt in The Clone Wars and LEGO Star Wars. He also plays various other characters on Ultimate Spider-Man. At the science fair, the various other pairs that we see earlier in the episode show off their inventions. Harry Osborn and Danny Rand make an X-ray camera, and Ava and Sam make an ice cube maker with liquid nitrogen. The conceit of this project is that it would counteract global warming by trapping carbon emissions from cars in ice. There's a lot wrong with this. First, trying to make this a real thing would be a logistical nightmare. Ava's stated goal was to trap carbon emissions from cars, but an average person doesn't know how to safely handle liquid nitrogen. Having an emission-freezing car would be a huge hassle because a user would have to have the training to handle liquid nitrogen or go to a mechanic to replace it when it runs out. But the liquid nitrogen in an emission-freezing car would most likely need to be replaced with a similar frequency to fuel. There's also the question of how they would dispose of the carbon emission ice. You can't just throw it out, because carbon emissions frozen in ice, the ice melting would release the emissions, so the ice has to stay cold somehow. So city infrastructure would have to be made to store this ice that can't be used for anything else. Freezing carbon emissions is just a dumb idea, and given how Ava is interrupted when explaining it, it makes it sound like the writers just don't think climate change is real. So Spidey takes a weird brick, and that weird brick turns out to be the awesome android, though it is notably very different from the comics. In the comics, the awesome android was made by the Fantastic Four villain, the Mad Thinker, and is a fairly standard power-absorbing character, except with the brick for a head and the inability to speak. The version in this show, meanwhile, is just a rampaging monster with the mind of a baby. The more it eats, the bigger it gets, but it can only use inorganic matter to grow, so it doesn't eat people. But cotton, linen, wool, silk, leather, and a lot of other materials clothes are made of are all organic. So this means Coulson's suit was 100% polyester.
Loser.
The Juggernaut is hiding in a trench coat on a train and gets off to fight Spider-Man when Andy breaks out, only for Andy to bore him and take away the helmet that makes him unstoppable. Spider-Man then takes Sam and Ava's science fair project to counter Andy, as they realize cold makes him weak. This episode is alright. It ranks high in C tier. There's not a whole lot to comment on other than Luke doesn't feel really important to this episode. Like, he's Peter's lab partner, but I haven't had any need to actually mention what he does in this episode. Season 1, Episode 15, For Your Eye Only. This episode begins with friction between Nick Fury and Spider-Man. Fury is upset at him for being undisciplined, as during training he was called in for, he was goofing off rather than actually doing the exercises. Fury then calls him in for extra lessons the next day, but the villainous organization Zodiac and their leader Scorpio take over the helicarrier. Spidey then runs into the incinerator to escape and begins sneaking around the helicarrier to find Fury. Then he finds a label maker in the trash, and I remember really liking this joke about the label maker as a kid, and honestly, it's still a banger.
Stupid animal head goons, Rassum, Frassum, incinerator. Sorry, just had to vent.
Amonga. Zodiac is trying to take down the helicarrier and steal all of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files. Spider-Man breaks out Fury, and they take out a bunch of weapons from the armory. This episode uses a lot of action set pieces, but the comedic bits explaining the random gadgets and the camera angles just make it fall flat. Like, Spider-Man runs up the side of a sinking helicarrier, but they use this camera angle. Scorpio is set up as a future villain as he flees the helicarrier and is established at the last minute as Nick Fury's brother. The episode focuses a lot on Nick Fury and Spider-Man's relationship, but honestly, it doesn't feel like it developed anymore. Even the episodes that focused on the team, as irritating as they were at points, had noticeable character development and strengthening of relationships. But I honestly feel like nothing changed between Fury and Spider-Man in this episode. This episode sets out to develop the relationship between Spider-Man and Nick Fury, but it just feels unfocused in that goal. Scorpio is one of the least memorable villains in the entire show, and this show has the living Laser and Mesmero. I legitimately forgot he was in another episode after this. D-tier episode. Season 1, Episode 15, Beatlemania. This episode begins with J. Jonah Jameson establishing the high-tech mercenary, the Beetle, and announcing his expose coming soon. Spider-Man complains about this news broadcast where Jameson compares the Beetle to him as the team fights Trapster. Their victory nets the team the opportunity to fight the Beetle on a special mission. Beetle likes his privacy, so he's gonna kill Jameson to shut him up before the expose airs, so the team has to protect Jameson. You just got MODOK'd. Share this with your friends to totally MODOK them. Also, this is actually a different design for MODOK than they end up using later in the series and in Avengers Assemble. And honestly, the design they use for MODOK later is absolutely awful, and I'm glad that they used the classic design here. There's also some other villains featured as the Beetle's clients. Nothing else really notable. Dr. Doom's there, I guess. For some reason here, there's a whole montage introducing the team and their powers here. It feels like this series really struggled to find a balance between being episodic and serialized. I mean, this is episode 16, the whole sequence just feels really unnecessary. The show has a lot of serialized developments like the Venom episodes, but then have episodes like this that spend a quarter of the runtime establishing the status quo. The montage adds nothing other than cute nods to prior designs of the Beetle from the comics. Then it is revealed that Mary Jane Watson has a job interview with Jameson on the day that the Beetle comes around to kill him. This episode then uses some cutaway gags to establish MJ's stubbornness, but using non-canon jokes like this to establish character is a really bad idea. It takes away from the pacing to use 15 seconds for an extended joke rather than a single line of Peter explaining that it's going to be hard to talk MJ out of the interview. It would have flowed better, and let's be honest, a single line played straight would have more impact than any of the cutaway gags in this show. So instead of trying to talk her out of it, Peter tags along, so the team ineffectually attempts to stop her from going to the interview. As they fail and Peter and MJ move on, they are taken out by the Beetle. After a while, MJ gets into the interview and Spidey fights the Beetle. The fighting goes on for a while, and it's cut between this and the awkwardly framed interview with MJ and Jameson. I wonder what that's setting up. There are callbacks to the first fight in the episode, and all the tension is retroactively revoked, as it's revealed that Jameson was never in the building, it was just a monitor. This reveal makes Beetle look like a moron. Like, he's set up as the super competent mercenary, but he cased the building and he didn't even know Jameson wasn't there. Honestly, the execution of this episode feels like the least interesting way to do this premise. A whole episode of Spider-Man and Jameson are running from the Beetle would have been a lot more interesting. The show has a very one-dimensional version of Jameson that only exists to show up on TV for comedy and shitting on Spider-Man, but they used to set up perfect for character development. So to preserve the status quo, they had to dodge featuring Jameson almost entirely. Also, Beetle has one line in this episode.
Missed! I never miss!
He's voiced by Steve Blum. His whole gag is being a silent badass with a silly voice that sounds like Starscream, but doesn't really hit. This episode could be S tier if the concept was tackled in a show that didn't have a paradoxical relationship with continuity, and if the Beetle had an actual personality that used Steve Blum's performance. Interactions between Jameson and Spider-Man would be tons of fun, but we never get that. D tier episode. Season 1, Episode 17, Snow Day. In this episode, there's a snow day at Midtown High, and since this episode takes place before the world of public education was plagued by virtual learning, school's out. S.H.I.E.L.D. then calls the team in for training, but they instead go to a tropical island to blow it off. Because Sam is the one who brought everyone there and he has zero reading comprehension, he takes them all to an island in the Bermuda Triangle, which has a Sandman that has been insane from being stuck on a desert island for several implied years. The fight with Sandman lasts forever, and the action just isn't very fun. Sandman is defeated in the most basic way possible by being superheated and turned into glass, and the episode ends with him stuck in an hourglass. Sandman is played by D. Bradley Baker, known for playing the clones in Star Wars The Clone Wars and a lot of other Star Wars media, Perry the Platypus in Phineas and Ferb, and Puffles in We Wish You a Merry Walrus. D. Bradley Baker is no stranger to Spider-Man. He voiced a minor character in Spider-Man the Animated Series, as well as Dr. Connors in Spectacular Spider-Man. This episode gets nothing done. Sandman is a Spider-Man villain with a ton of potential, but he doesn't amount to anything here. He's a type of villain that works best when he's fighting Spider-Man alone. He doesn't really have the power to stand up to a whole group of superheroes at once. It just makes any team who has difficulty dealing with him look like chumps. Sandman is a Spider-Man villain with a ton of potential for any episode in a cartoon, but he just doesn't amount to anything here. This episode is honestly the first F-tier episode. It sets up a really fun concept and just goes absolutely nowhere with it. Season 1, Episode 18, Damage. This episode begins with a fight against the Wrecking Crew. These guys are simple. They're a group of supervillains whose entire identity revolves around causing immense collateral damage. They fight the team, which emphasizes how terrible they are at preventing collateral damage. Everyone on the team agrees that the behavior of the Wrecking Crew was suspicious. They wrecked a whole city block and then some and stole nothing. So Fear makes the team work for damage control. He calls it undercover work, but they're still in costume. What's the point of this whole thing? The boss of damage control condemns a building, but Spider-Man looks inside and discovers that it's connected to the empty vault of the bank next door. Spider-Man breaks into the boss's office, which sets off this security system, which I can only assume is meant to destroy intruders as well as anything they would try to steal. He realizes that the boss didn't do it, but then he discovers that the Wrecking Crew joined Damage Control to steal stuff. Because, like, Damage Control has these shrinking guns they use to clear rubble, but they wear off after a while. They then store the stolen loot on the roof of the Damage Control building because fight ensues and then unsues. Anyway, the Wrecking Crew are all voiced by voice actors who come up later in this retrospective anyway, and I forgot to write them down earlier in the script, so I'm just gonna cover them later. This episode is alright. I really appreciate the lack of cutaway gags for a change, and the final joke of the episode is pretty funny, but the rest of the episode is just kinda C tier. Season 1, Episode 19, Homesick Hulk. Aunt May is leaving for a trip over the weekend, and she's being overly concerned about Peter's well-being. She brings up how Peter has a terrible history of taking care of pets. So Spider-Man grumbles about his ability to be responsible when a meteor lands in New York, containing the Hulk. Some alien thing is attacking the Hulk, so Spider-Man smashes it, and he ends up hiding the Hulk at his house so he doesn't get taken away by S.H.I.E.L.D. Something weird about this episode is that in a lot of Marvel media, when unconscious, Hulk reverts back to Bruce Banner. But this doesn't happen in this episode, nor does Hulk revert back to Banner much at all in the entire shared universe of shows. Why Hulk never transforms back is never explained, or it's explained in Hulk and the Agents of S.M.A.S.H., and I don't care. Honestly, the best way I'd describe this episode is aggressively unfunny. May comes home early because she twisted her ankle, so it's a whole song and dance of Peter trying to hide the Hulk from her, and it's just unending. The Hulk is sick too, so it's just constant gross out humor and Hulk wrecking stuff. So they track down the alien thing, beat the alien thing, whoopee. S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up and Hulk is taken away, I think. Even when I was a little kid watching the show, this was by far my least favorite episode. I mean, I liked Legends of Chima and I hated this episode, so I think that says a lot. Bottom of F tier. Nothing of note happens, and the relationship between Spider-Man and the Hulk in this show is just missed potential, man. Season 1, Episode 20, Run Pig Run. This episode is one I remember very strongly from when I watched the show as a kid. In this episode, Peter is trying desperately to get to school on time, primarily because it's picture day and he has a history of bad yearbook photos. He also takes the time to grumble about his publicity problems and having to skip breakfast. Then a hot dog salesman comes around and says he loves Spider-Man and gives him a free hot dog, and Spider-Man accepts it. He then eats the hot dog despite his spider sense going off about it. An unfunny bit about his brain yelling at his stomach ensues, and he eats the hot dog. Then Loki reveals himself, showing that the hot dog was enchanted to turn Spider-Man into a pig. Peter is then hunted in observation of an Asgardian holiday, where hunters come from Asgard to Earth to hunt a boar. This episode is a lot of fun. It established continuity with Thor and Loki to set up the conflict and direct the plot. I especially love when the chase comes to the school and Coulson and Thor just have a rapport. It makes the world feel bigger when characters just know each other. There's also a running gag where a character enters a room and tells Flash Thompson to run away. It's really funny. This episode has a lot of jokes that land, and once again, I can attribute this to the relative lack of cutaway gags, and this was dense with proper jokes and funny lines of dialogue. Scourge chases Spider-Man throughout the city, and then the school, and eventually to the helicarrier. Loki gives Scourge and his hunters plenty of help, but they fail to catch Spider-Man before sunset, where Spider-Man turns back from a pig into a man. Also, Scourge is voiced by Travis Willingham. This episode is straight up S tier. No notes really other than a couple unfunny cutaway gags. But honestly, that's par for the course for this series, and the rest of the jokes honestly make up for it. Season 1, Episode 21, I Am Spider-Man. Much like Run Pig Run, this episode's premise stuck a lot in my mind from when I was a kid. This episode begins with Spider-Man fighting the Trapster in the Midtown High cafeteria. Spidey picks on the choice to take MJ as a hostage, but Trapster taking a hostage is a bad idea in general in this fight. He uses a single hand to grab her arm and doesn't even try to do anything that would actually restrain her. Instead of restraining her, Trapster opts to hit on a kid that he knows is a high schooler and gets promptly hit in the balls. Peter then wins the fight and reveals his secret identity. This isn't a convincing fake out, and it just leads to the finale of the episode mostly just being a retread of this same fight. Anyways, cold open concludes, title sequence, flashback to 1 week ago when Peter finds out that MJ was written a Spider-Man play. I guess it makes enough sense that MJ wants to write a play, especially one about Spider-Man, because pretty much her only personality traits are reporter and Spider-Man. If the writers want to put her in this episode, I guess this is an alright reason to do it. What doesn't make sense, though, is that this play was put together in a single week. High school theater productions take months to put together. Auditions and casting alone take over a week, and rehearsals take months. Peter objects to the production of this play, but Coulson says no, and implies that he knows nothing about how theater productions actually work. Coulson mentions that the script for the musical is written, but earlier in this same exact scene, he implies that the songs are still not done. The songs are part of the ding-dang script in a musical. I think this episode would scan a lot better if the 1 week time frame for the production of the musical was a joke at Coulson's expense. He has big dreams and ideas about theater, but doesn't actually understand how it works, so the production is an absolute nightmare. And I think that would have been a really funny recurring gag. So, Flash gets cast on the spot for the part of Spider-Man, and because Sam is a jerk who only exists to instigate conflict, he stole Peter's actual suit and gave the real Spider-Man suit to Flash. So Peter tries to get the suit back from Flash, but he insists on method acting out on the street as Spider-Man, instead of, attending rehearsal. He then gets into a fight with the Trapster, and Peter is very upset by this predicament. Peter sneaks up to this building to help Flash fight Trapster while not being seen. Realistically, a rock this size falling off a roof this high, especially with the added force from Peter slamming it down with his webs, should have killed Trapster instantly. Anyways, it's now the day of the musical, and Flash is having stage fright. I really like this scene where Peter helps Flash out backstage before the show starts. It's a great place for character development for Flash, and it's remarkably genuine. This sets up amazingly for a heartwarming ending, but the ending does stumble a lot. After the pep talk, Peter finds Trapster, who followed Flash to the school because he still thinks he's the real Spider-Man. Trapster glues up Flash, Peter suits up to stop him, and the fight brings them to the stage. We then, as we mentioned, get a retread of the fight from earlier. Peter takes off his mask, but everyone's like, oh, it's a play, this was all just acting. This episode was a really mixed bag. It has its moments, but it's just frustrating to get to those moments. The third act also kind of implies that the entire play is only one scene long, yet has multiple songs. This makes the 1 week time frame a bit more believable, I guess, but a play that's only one scene long is just plain weird. This episode is low C tier, but it had S tier potential. I think if they turned the 1 week time frame for the play into a joke and focused on Flash's character a little more, it could be really good. Give this boy some lasting character development by having him overcome his stage fright and his ego by stepping up to fight the Trapster. That would have been so good. Season 1, Episode 22, The Iron Octopus. Harry and Peter are at the Osborn residence because Norman has some supervillain work to do and can't drive Harry to the school sports game. This is a straight up plot hole. The very first episode establishes that the Osborns have a chauffeur. Norman does not need to drive his son to the game. Also, is this scene trying to imply that Harry is supposed to be a player in the game?
Thanks, Dad. Stuck home when I should be behind home plate.
I don't think his parents being able to transport him should be an issue for, high school sports games. Norman is suddenly attacked, and Spider-Man comes to the rescue, and the attacker is Iron Man. This episode does a good job of making the Iron Man suit feel really powerful. Spider-Man takes out the armor only to find it empty, and ends up going to Tony Stark's place to investigate. Spider-Man and Iron Man find out that Doc Ock has a drone hacking into Stark's base, controlling his old suits and stealing all the files from his servers so Otto can make his own Iron Man suit. Norman and Harry are brought to the helicarrier for their protection, and Norman is really upset at Tony for one of his suits attacking him. Then they both get attacked by Otto in the Iron Man suit he made. During the fight, Ock's suit just fails because the arc reactor plans don't actually work. Tony keeps the real plans just in his head and just has fake plans on his computers. Ock then crashes into a building and is captured by Norman, and made to work for him again for the season finale. This episode is pretty solid. It pushes the plot along, and the appearance from another hero in this episode makes sense and is worked into the plot really well. I like how Otto's haste for revenge leads to his downfall. This episode is A tier. Season 1, Episode 23, Not a Toy. This episode is a lot of fun in the first half. The team is beset by an unseen enemy, who is shown to be Captain America, voiced by Roger Craig Smith. He's notable for playing Sonic the Hedgehog in the games ever since Sonic Free Riders, Ezio Auditore in Assassin's Creed, and Medusa's ass in Breadwinners. He also played Captain Marvel in Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Roger Craig Smith has voiced Captain America in a whole host of Marvel animated projects since Ultimate Spider-Man, including all of the Disney XD Marvel Universe, LEGO Marvel Superheroes, and Disney Infinity. So the attention-grabbing cold open is revealed to just be a training exercise between the team and Captain America. There's a joke that goes on with Coulson about him trying to make the team not embarrass him in front of Captain America. It doesn't really go anywhere, or at least not anywhere funny. The team then spars for another round of Captain America. This time, he puts down the shield and says the first person to take him down can keep it. This fight is a really good way to show the superior level of experience that Captain America has. He counters every attack thrown at him expertly, all while commenting on what's holding his students back and giving them advice. I think his role as a mentor is a bit of an underrated appeal of Captain America as a character, and this episode shows it off really well. Also, there's a moment where Captain America steals Spider-Man's web shooters after throwing him, and I loved noticing that bit of shot continuity during the episode. It's not much, but I really appreciate the attention to detail. The match ends with the team firmly losing. Cap then leaves the team alone with the shield, but tells them that they can touch it, but not throw it. Spider-Man then promptly picks up the shield and throws it out the window. He chases it around New York City, only for it to fall into the Latvian embassy and into the hands of Dr. Doom. The episode then centers on Spider-Man, Captain America, fighting all of Doom's robots to try and get the shield back before he can use vibranium to power a death ray.
Not Michigan!
The episode has a lot of action, so it's a little hard to comment on, but it's pretty good action. The episode's plot is stupid and I love it. The biggest gripe I have this episode is that there are a lot of cutaway gags, but this episode is still A tier. Season 1, episode 24, Attack of the Beetle. In this episode, Coulson and May go on a date. I have a lot of gripes with this episode. First off, it's yet another flash forward with something bad happening, then they back up to the setup. Instead of building up to anything, it just makes the first act take up way too much of the episode. Like, Beetle comes out of nowhere during the episode. Instead of a flash forward opening, they could have established actual suspense with a shot or two of the Beetle looking menacing during the first act. This episode consists of Peter having an arc of him being upset about the prospect of Coulson dating May, so he causes problems about it as Spider-Man during their date. It's a real dick move. Beetle then shows up in this episode. He fights Spider-Man for a while before Coulson reveals that Beetle is after him because he was the only agent to ever take him down. This is blatantly false. Spider-Man has taken him down too. The episode wastes a lot of time getting to this reveal. It would have been a lot more interesting if Beetle actually spoke out of one line per appearance so far, and in fact, I don't think he actually speaks for the rest of the series. Honestly, not a lot to comment on. It's a concept that I wasn't on board with from the outset, and his execution was kind of alright, and I don't think May and Coulson being a thing really comes up in any other episode. Like, Coulson disappears for some random mission during season 3 because Clark Gregg isn't available anymore because of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And just like the fact that May and Coulson used to date is never brought up. Anyway, this episode was super mid, C tier. Season 1, episode 25, Revealed. In this episode, today is the day that report cards come in for students at Midtown High, and Harry got good grades, so Norman is taking Harry and Peter out to celebrate. Instead of straightforwardly congratulating his son on his accomplishments, he gives him a backhanded compliment and implying that Peter was the only reason he got there. Peter denies this, but Norman only agrees with the refutation to be polite. Peter is then called in for a last-minute mission with the team. He tries to get out of it, but it's important, so he has to bail right at the door to the restaurant with a bad excuse. Norman then leaves for a reason that the audience knows is definitely related, and Harry leaves upset. The team is then led to an Octobot ambush by the Frightful Four in an Oscorp warehouse. Anyways, yeah, the Frightful Four show up for a bit. I think it's funny how they're just Doc Ock's recurring cronies when they fail at everything he's ever hired them for before this. The team beats up the robots, remarking on how they've grown, until they realize Spider-Man was taken in the chaos. He wakes up in Doc Ock's lab, and this is the part where the cutaway gags pushed me to my breaking point. In earlier episodes, I could excuse them as trying to be funny in places where jokes felt somewhat natural. Oftentimes, the gag's main problem was grinding the pace to a halt for a gag that I personally found unfunny. It misses the point that Spider-Man's quips are jokes themselves, not setups to punchlines. But this episode sets me off. It just mangles my fucking metaphors. They insert cutaway gags into the scene where Spider-Man gets all the plot information dumped on him. They put this fucking Thanksgiving dinner joke in after Octavius explains that Venom is made from Spider-Man's blood. They put this montage of 10 agonizing seconds of Norman being furiously angry about Spider-Man when Peter learns that Norman's been the one trying to kill him all season. So Norman is suited up in this funky little suit and is ready to kill Spider-Man, but Octavius injects him with a serum made from Spider-Man and Venom's DNA. He then reveals that he somehow figured out that Oscorp was responsible for the radioactive spider, and okay, for one, it does track that Oscorp made the radioactive spider. That's been the case in a lot of Spider-Man media nowadays, including the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, the Sam Raimi trilogy, and the Amazing Spider-Man. But how the fuck did Otto figure this out? He asserts it was Oscorp technology, but he says he doesn't know how. Like, I can tell that they want the dynamic that the Ultimate Spider-Man comics had, where Norman knew he was responsible for Spider-Man's creation, and this is part of his obsession with Spider-Man. But they just took that route without putting in the legwork to make it happen. We cut this cutaway gag with this wacky little framing of Peter's origin story. Notably, this gag establishes an important piece of information for a timeline for the series because it calls Peter a high schooler on the day he gets bit by the radioactive spider. so he would be a sophomore at the youngest in season 1. The timeline does get really weird regarding other evidence later, but we'll cross that whole mess of a bridge when we get to it way later down the line. So Norman is transformed into the Goblin. Norman is then transformed into the Green Goblin, or rather just the Goblin. They only ever call him the Goblin in this series, which I think is just kind of goofy. I mean, let's be fair, Green Goblin is kind of goofy too, but never calling him the Green Goblin sounds too self-serious. The Goblin then enters a rage and takes on the team. He beats them pretty easily, but Spider-Man holds his own for a bit. So Peter then turns the shock gauntlet on him, and it just fucking launches him up into the Oscorp building above. That just doesn't track, nor does the gauntlet just randomly starting these fires when there's no flammable liquid around. You know, a fiery little conclusion at the end of this episode. That's aesthetic, but just like, could you maybe establish how the fire started, please? So Harry finds his home in ruins, and Peter is upset. He's going to take on the Goblin alone to fix his mess because his friends got hurt, and this whole emotional beat falls super flat. This episode inserted cutaway gags at so many wrong points that I just can't buy an attempt at an emotional beat because the show feels like it doesn't take its own plot seriously at this point. Interrupting emotional character moments with jokes is the exact same fucking problem the MCU has. I expected this show to be better. To borrow a point from somebody smarter than me, Red from Overly Sarcastic Productions explains in her video about lampshading and a bit more in her video about bathos how comically drawing attention to something essentially tells the audience that the thing that they just made fun of does not need to be taken seriously and shouldn't be.
It's useful for comedy, but it can easily undercut major story moments and emotional scenes if not applied carefully. This is why I think the episode really doesn't work. The emotional and dramatic scenes feel extremely disingenuous when they're interrupted by cutaway gags. Now that I think about it, this may be the reason that I think the action in the show doesn't often stand out a whole lot as really good. The animation and choreography are both really good on average, but the cutaway gags provide bathos for the action scene, implying to the audience that the action scene at hand isn't worth very much to the writers. Bathos can change the tone away from what the writer intends if it's not applied carefully, and oftentimes I don't think the show applies bathos carefully. This is why I'm against cutaway gags on principle. A character making a joke says something about that character. A character setting up a joke for the writer to execute upon that's unrelated to everything else going on says something about the show. Something that I think isn't very good. D-tier episode.
Season 1, Episode 26, The Rise of the Goblin. This episode begins with Peter establishing that it's been a few days since Transformation Central, and Peter's been watching Harry, hoping to protect him from the eventual strike of the Goblin. One weird thing about this episode is that it focuses on how Peter's been tirelessly working to resolve this mess, but it doesn't really approach how this affected his life as Peter Parker. Like, the big thing about Spider-Man is that being a superhero impacts his personal life, but the show doesn't really touch on that in major ways, and I think this episode is a point where it really should have. The Goblin then attacks the limousine right at the front door to the school. The team then shows up. Peter is upset because he wants to protect them, but they're putting themselves in danger. Luke is even fighting with a broken arm. Then Norman chases them through the school. Harry is resistant to leave. Peter said that Norman is in fact the Goblin and has done a very poor job of explaining it. After a long chase, they manage to flee through the detention room that is also secretly a transport to the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. Did I forget to mention that earlier? Whatever. Also, the helicarrier rises out of the lake, and when that happens, wouldn't the change in water level cause a lot of fish to die? Anyways, the Goblin smirks as he sees a S.H.I.E.L.D. SWAT team storming the school. The team then hears over comms that the Goblin has been captured. Then the Goblin crashes a helicopter into the helicarrier. Norman used a fucking voice impression over comms to trick Fury. Hilarious and iconic. Also, he's been acting this whole time. After spending a few days to get his bearings after his transformation, Norman has retained his full intelligence, though he may not exactly be of sound mind. Spider-Man says that Norman's lost himself, and Norman refutes this. He got exactly what he wanted. He's superhuman now, and it's all thanks to Spider-Man. Norman explains that Spider-Man helped him become the Goblin in some way.
Let's see how the writers handle this narrative beat. Do they A, give this moment the narrative weight that it warrants, or do they B, use a cutaway gag and have Peter comedically fail to explain the situation?
Your dad's an evil mastermind, go bye-bye, and a liar pants on fire.
The Goblin then begins tearing his way through the helicarrier. He goes into the lab, and oh no, he crushed Dr. Connors' iconic working arm! Oh no! He also steals a pair of energy-blasting gauntlets and a glider. Shieldus had these around, and they were in his size. What were they thinking? Harry then goes full Venom, and the Osborns begin tearing their way through the helicarrier. The helicarrier begins sinking, and Venom and the Goblin gang up on Spider-Man. Harry isn't full Venom for more than about 5 minutes, as he just grabs an exposed circuit breaker and electrocutes the symbiote off of himself. Norman then takes the opportunity to put down his son yet again as he sucks away the venom in an unestablished capsule in his glove. His glove that he just stole, so how did he figure out that the compartment was there in just the couple of minutes he's had since then? Anyway, Peter wants to chase after the Goblin, but he can't because he's out of web fluid. I fucking hate this writing decision. What should have happened is that Peter should have realized that he can't chase after the Goblin because there are people trapped under rubble and they would die if he left. Instead, Peter goes on rescue because it's the only thing he can do without his webs. Not because it's the thing that he realizes he should be doing. Stopping the Goblin is ultimately a personal affair for Peter, and the whole point of the Spider-Man is that he gives up his own happiness for the benefit of others, because with great power comes great responsibility. So the helicarrier is wrecked, and the team is out of a home because they lived on the helicarrier. That wasn't established anywhere before until now. It makes sense, I guess, but like if they established that earlier, that would have been cool. So Peter decides to invite the team to live with him in May. A new status quo is established, and this episode just frustrates me to no end. I've got some more thoughts, but a lot of this applies to the season as a whole, so I'll save that for the postseason analysis. Anyway, C-tier episode. We're done with the season now, so let's talk about that. First, I want to deconstruct the show's cast a little and the roles they play in the series. Naturally, I think the first character that we should cover is Spider-Man. One thing that majorly intrigues me about this incarnation of the character is how he develops a lot of characters who know his secret identity. Generally in Spider-Man media, Peter really cares about keeping his identity a secret. It's part of why one of his defining characteristics is that being Spider-Man ruins his life as Peter Parker. He's a loner. Being a superhero destroys his relationships because, in the end, Spider-Man has to choose between the social wants and needs and his obligations as a hero, and keeping a secret makes him look like an asshole you can never hold to any plans. But the main circle of friends this show focuses on is Peter and the rest of the team. They all know his secret identity, and they're superheroes too, so he has people who understand when he flakes on plans with bad excuses because they have to do it too. And in fact, they are all probably going to do it at the same time for the same thing. Harry and MJ get shunted to the background super hard. They're desperately fighting for relevance. Harry has 10 appearances in this season, and 2 are minor roles. MJ gets 13 episodes, with 3 of them being cameos, and most of them being in just extremely minor roles, like writing the play in episode 21. Meanwhile, Luke Cage has 22 appearances in season 1. With the rest of the team sporting similar numbers. Aside from episode 4 and a bit in episode 3, this shift in Peter's friend group isn't really acknowledged when it's the perfect source of conflict, with Peter wanting to not drift apart from Harry and MJ, but him being pulled in the other direction because of the team. Another big problem about the show's lack of consideration to the double life aspect of Spider-Man is that the team doesn't really have a cover for taking time together after school. Like, it would strike people as weird that Peter is apparently hanging out with the team, but they never see them together outside of school. They could have been in a club together, or a study group or something, as a cover for S.H.I.E.L.D. This show really neglects to flesh out the new developments it makes for Peter's life outside of being Spider-Man. Also, because of the show's weird structure where they have an overarching plot, but still feel the need to make every episode an entry point to the story, I don't feel like I know anything more about these characters than I did at the start of the season. Like, in Strange Days, all the team is trapped in their nightmares, and learning what they have nightmares about should be thought-provoking. What we get instead makes everyone except Peter and maybe Danny look arguably more shallow and one-dimensional.
Ava is a smart kid who likes academics, and her nightmare is about failing school. Luke is a guy with a big heart and big muscles, so his nightmare is about holding up a collapsing building. Sam is a clown with a lot of bravado, but he's afraid of bunnies. Another big reason I don't feel connected to the team is that since every episode focuses squarely on Peter and is shown from his perspective for the most part, we don't get much focus on what the team is like separate from him. None of their relationships feel more developed at the end of the season than at the beginning. When Peter introduces the team to May at the end of the season, he gives her all one-sentence summaries that one could have inferred from the second episode about these characters. The team feels like a set of characters that Peter puts up with because they're co-workers rather than actual friends. I can think of one example of these characters hanging out together for fun, and that's the beach episode. I don't think the team is a wholly bad idea in concept, but in execution, these characters don't have the type of character dynamic or story decisions made to make them feel like a believable superhero team. How much of a mess this team is feels more like a bug than a feature. The team doesn't feel like the focal point of this show, which is a problem in a superhero show that focuses on a team. This is a Spider-Man show first and a S.H.I.E.L.D. team show second. And you can really feel that, because the big important stuff always comes back to being about Spider-Man. Let's talk about this show's incarnation of Norman Osborn. The big thing that irks me about this incarnation of the Goblin is that, because of the dramatic and permanent transformation, Norman doesn't have access to Oscorp resources to fund his supervillainy in this version. One of the most interesting things about Norman as a nemesis to Spider-Man is that the Green Goblin is a secret identity for Norman, just like Spider-Man is for Peter Parker. He uses all of his money and power to fuel his operations against Spider-Man, while Spider-Man is an average citizen struggling to make ends meet while also working as a superhero. Removing Norman from Oscorp sort of removes the class struggle part of Spider-Man. In fact, with Spider-Man being a member of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Norman being on the run, it's kind of the opposite of the usual dynamic. Norman scavenges for all of his tech, including stealing the glider from S.H.I.E.L.D. instead of making it himself. I mean, I love the combination of the transformation from the Ultimate Comics and the glider from the original continuity, but I don't like this way of it being attained. On the subject of S.H.I.E.L.D., does it strike anyone else as weird that Fury is so prominent in this show? Fury is the goddamn director of S.H.I.E.L.D., a whole-ass government agency meant to deal with supervillains, and he spends his time worrying about the team. Logically, Coulson should be the one doing a lot of the stuff that Fury does in this show. I mean, it's Coulson's role to be the team's handler. He should be the one briefing them on missions. Honestly, I think the reason this is the case is because Clark Gregg voices Coulson. Clark Gregg had other roles going on, like the Avengers. If they had used a different actor for Coulson, or assigned the role of the team's handler to another named S.H.I.E.L.D. character, I think that would solve this issue, but brand synergy is sacrosanct in this show, I guess. Coulson being a more major character would make this show a lot better. Like, I think it would be a lot more funny in a lot of ways if Coulson was more prominent. Because, like, Fury and Coulson, I think, are probably on the same level of seriousness, but Fury is too much of a badass to be the butt of the joke in the same way Coulson can be. The next thing I want to focus on is the humor of Ultimate Spider-Man. I've said a lot throughout this analysis, but it bears repeating that the cutaway gags are awful and detract from every single one of this show's strengths. They're not just unfunny, but they actively make the show worse. This show can have some really funny dialogue when it has the room to breathe. Like, the setups for the cutaway gags are often better jokes on their own than the cutaway gags. For example, in Run Pig Run, Peter's about to eat the cursed hot dog. He thinks for a moment as he's about to eat it because his spider sense is going off. But he disregards it, saying that it always does that around street food. That's a good joke, but is instead turned into the setup for this dumb bit where his brain is arguing with his stomach. These cutaway gags disrupt the flow of the episodes. It takes up the space that the rest of the episode could use for better pacing or have actual good jokes. There's maybe one cutaway gag that I can think of that is even remotely funny out of context. It's this one with Norman getting a rocket launcher for Pickle Jar. Like, this joke could easily be funny in the same sort of way a Family Guy joke is funny if you see it clipped on social media. In context, however, it distracts from an episode of otherwise really good pacing and tone. The only good thing about the cutaway gags in this show is that they get more scarce in later seasons. Finally, I wanted to briefly talk about the general production values of this show. In general, it's pretty good in the art and animation department.
The movement in action scenes is pretty great most of the time. Sometimes the editing effects can leave something to be desired. The amount of blurry camera swooshes can get repetitive, but it's not often downright bad. The effects are alright. The only standout bad one I'd say is the moving grain texture for Sandman. I just think it's too dense of a texture and it looks kinda bad in motion. If they use something less dense, I think it would look a lot better. Finally is the voice acting. There are some standouts, but I'd generally call the voice acting in this show average. Drake Bell sounds just fine as Spider-Man. So far, he doesn't really rise above that. His performance is below average compared to other Spider-Man voice actors, but to be fair, it's some pretty stacked competition. Still, they 100% should have hired someone with far more voice acting experience for their main character. I wouldn't chalk this up to bad voice direction either, because the voice direction was done by Colette Sunderman, who voice directed for Codename Kids Next Door, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, and Chowder. She is demonstrably good at her job, so we can firmly pin down that Drake Bell is the problem here. All in all, I think season 1 was a rough start. This show doesn't really play to the merits of a Spider-Man show, but it's starting to find its legs and stand on its own merits. Kinda. Season 2 does end up being a massive improvement over season 1, so look forward to that. One of the last things I wanted to touch on before we move on to season 2 was Drake Bell's appearance as Spider-Man in Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Since E.M.H. Season 2 came out alongside Season 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man, Drake Bell voiced Spider-Man in the 3 episodes he appeared in. J.K. Simmons also voiced J. Jonah Jameson in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, though he only appeared in 1 episode, along with Along Came a Spider, which introduced Spider-Man to the show. It does look like standard Disney brand synergy between various Marvel properties, as well as Disney just reusing actors they had cast in the same role in another show. However, it's not actually that simple. After Spider-Man's first appearance in E.M.H., it was alleged that Josh Keaton originally voiced Spider-Man in these episodes, and he was redubbed with Drake Bell. For the uninitiated, Josh Keaton played Spider-Man in The Spectacular Spider-Man. He reprised his role as Spider-Man in Across the Spider-Verse as a cameo. Josh Keaton has also voiced Spider-Man on a lot of other projects, and has appeared as other characters in Spider-Man projects like Norman Osborn in Spider-Man 2017, and Electro in Insomniac Spider-Man. Anyway, back to the redubbing. The allegation of redubbing came from Josh Keaton himself on his Facebook. Quote, "Wow, so they redubbed my audio. I recorded a few Avengers eps as Spider-Man and was looking forward to seeing them. Typical Parker luck, I guess." End quote. So, Disney redubbed the episodes Keaton was in with Drake Bell. When the fans found out, they were upset. People campaigned on social media for the cuts of the episodes with Keaton's performance to be released in some shape or form to no avail. A lot of people were trashing Drake Bell for replacing Keaton, but Josh Keaton told a lot of people to calm the fuck down on his Tumblr. For additional confirmation's sake, Christopher Yost, the writer for Along Came a Spider, said this on his Twitter. "Yes, the Spider-Man in E.M.H. was originally intended to be the same as Spectacular Spider-Man." End quote. Marvel Chief Creative Officer Joe Quesada supposedly explained in an interview with Gizmodo that this change was made because children would be confused by the different voices for Spider-Man. I couldn't confirm this information because the Gizmodo site is poopy and the video doesn't work and it's not uploaded anywhere else. So let's take that with a grain of salt, folks. Earth's Mightiest Heroes Season 2 aired after Ultimate Spider-Man on the same block, so that supposed reason, supposedly by Joe Quesada, makes some sense, I guess. The other characters still had different actors, but it was a lot less reasonable to recast so many roles. That about wraps it up for this season. I don't have a whole lot to talk about that wouldn't be me repeating myself unnecessarily, so let us move on. Welcome one and all to the first Ultimate Spider-Man Intermission! Now, some people in the audience may be thinking that I'm ripping off Quentin Reviews' format with this. Those people are correct. Now, I've got topics for 3 intermissions, but the first that I really wanted to tackle was the merchandise. I really can't talk about a lot of the merchandise from the show in any specific detail, because Ultimate Spider-Man for a while was just the default for Spider-Man merch. Like, there is tons of stuff. The show designs of these characters were what a lot of action figures and shirts were based off. Art and branding for the show still gets used even now, when the show ended over 6 years ago. Honestly, I think a major reason a lot of people didn't like Ultimate Spider-Man in its day is because it was inescapable. Because the branding was everywhere, it was just kind of annoying for older audiences, I guess. Anyways, a lot of this merch is hard to talk about in anything but really broad strokes, except for one thing. It's the Lego sets, baby! I'm gonna be perfectly honest. The only reason I'm doing an intermission about the merch at all is because I want to talk about Legos for like 20 minutes. So, let's talk about Legos. From about 2012 to 2015, I spent damn near every dollar of my allowance on Legos. My first hyperfixation was Ninjago, but I branched out into other themes, like the tragically short-lived Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles theme, and the now endangered LEGO DC Superheroes. But the one relevant today is LEGO Marvel Superheroes. LEGO Marvel Superheroes got its start in spring of 2012, with 4 LEGO sets based on the Avengers movie, and 1 based on the X-Men comics. Then in July of 2012, the Ultimate Spider-Man sub-theme started, with just 1 set as its first wave. Looking back, Ultimate Spider-Man got surprisingly few LEGO sets. There were 8 sets in total, discounting polybags, with 4 waves. I'll get into the details and nitty-gritty about that a little later, though. The first set was released standalone during the first season. It was called Spider-Man, Doc Ock's Ambush. It features Spider-Man, Iron Fist, and Dr. Octopus, all figures reminiscent of their show designs. This set doesn't really call to mind any specific episodes of the show. Doc Ock's lab showed up a couple times in really shadowy scenes before being destroyed in the only episode that really gave a good look at it, and that episode didn't feature Iron Fist at all. Anyways, this is a B-tier set. One thing that I think is kind of weird about it is that it's got Spider-Man rescuing Iron Fist when Spider-Man is captured in the episode. Moving on. The whole thing of the LEGO sets fitting only vaguely to the series sticks throughout the entire run. This isn't too surprising because LEGO often has to work with early concept art a lot of the time to be able to release sets to tie into shows and movies. Any set that has a degree of a storyline is often going to make something out of limited information. Even LEGO's own themes with tie-in shows like Monkey Kid and Ninjago have this problem. I know this is the case for later seasons of Ninjago. I'm not sure if this applies to the earlier seasons, but an interview with the set designer for modern Ninjago sets said the show and sets are essentially working from the same concept art and make changes as they see fit, which naturally leads to a lot of inconsistencies. The next wave has 2 sets, Spider-Man Spider Cycle Chase and Spider-Man Daily Bugle Showdown. Yes, the titles of the sets had Spider-Man in the name, despite Ultimate Spider-Man being on the box. These sets were both released right before the premiere of Season 2, so it was still largely themed around the first season. Part of why I'm covering the LEGO sets now, because not a lot of sets tie into the later seasons, really. Spider Cycle Chase is nothing specific, I'm gonna be honest. It has Spider-Man, Venom, and Nick Fury. This one isn't even loosely based on an episode, it's just straight up something that didn't happen in the show. Nick Fury doesn't have a flying car in the final show, and he doesn't really directly fight Venom in any episode. It's a cheapo $20 set, and the only merits it really has are the minifigures included. I think the car is trash, and bulky brick-built LEGO motorcycles killed my grandma. This was the first time Venom or Nick Fury got figures, at least. The Venom figure actually uses the same torso print as the San Diego Comic-Con black suit Spider-Man figure. Otherwise, the builds are pretty cringe. B-tier set. The other set was the first LEGO Daily Bugle. The modern $300 one slaps the shit out of it, but, you know, it's a $300 set and this one was $50. The Daily Bugle Showdown has J. Jonah Jameson, the Beetle, Nova, Spider-Man, and Dr. Doom of all characters as figures. Allow me to break down why Dr. Doom is a really strange inclusion here. The focus of the set is clearly on the Daily Bugle, so Doom's inclusion is pretty random. He has 2 featuring appearances in Season 1, but the focus of the set is on the Bugle, like in Beatlemania. In fact, Mary Jane Watson appears in a later set in the series, but I think this set would have been a better place to put her. Doom did show up in that episode, but only as an unvoiced cameo in the montage of Beetle's clients. He's got this helicopter thing from Not a Toy, so it looks like they're combining plot lines. Overall, it's a weird inclusion, but valuable nonetheless, because to this day, it's the only release of a LEGO minifigure of Dr. Doom. To make a long story in recent comics history short, Ike Perlmutter shunted the X-Men and Fantastic Four out of pretty much all Marvel media for a few years out of spite for the Fox movies. This of course means that basically no new merch was made for them until pretty recently, so there are not a lot of opportunities for these characters to have figures. So back to the set, they whitewashed Sam, just like the clones in Star Wars. My day is ruined.
Give this boy his melanin back. This building is meant to be reminiscent of the Daily Bugle Communications building as shown in Beatlemania, at least from the outside. It's a decent build if it bit uninteresting on the back. I'd hesitate to call this an outright bad set. Doom's inclusion was superfluous at best, but in hindsight, I would definitely not sacrifice a LEGO Dr. Doom existing for this set to have a better build. The other figures are alright, I guess. This isn't the first LEGO J. Jonah Jameson, actually. The first was in a set for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. The design isn't really accurate to the show. His suit is a light blue instead of dark blue, and his hair is gray instead of two-toned black and white, but I get the change of color since this was before the dawn of LEGO making dual-molded minifigure pieces. Still, they have no excuse for his suit color. Aside from the whitewashing, Nova's figure is fine, and the Beetle is as good as he really could have been for the standards LEGO had for minifigure detail at the time. Nowadays, Beetle isn't a character that's really in demand enough to be featured in a set, so I'm glad we have this one. Overall, Doom's inclusion makes me want to consider this set for A tier, but honestly, I think this set's better off in like B tier. This set really needed to be a more expensive set to really shine. Next up is the third wave. This wave released between seasons 2 and 3 and had 3 sets. The first one was a tiny $10 set, Spider-Trike vs. Electro. They dropped having Spider-Man in the title of every set. Absolute cringe. My day is cringe. This set by far has the least basis in the actual show. There's no Spider-Trike in the show or in the LEGO set because the set has 4 wheels. This is just an excuse to make a LEGO Electro figure, and I'm fine with that because I really like the Ultimate Spider-Man design for Electro. I just wish the set was good. It's got that diamond piece, which is my favorite LEGO piece ever. B tier set. Also, there was this poly bag, which I guess can be considered part of Wave 3, but it didn't release in Wave 3. It was this little poly bag that released at Toys R Us in the US, and I guess stores that are similar to Toys R Us in other countries. It's just Spider-Man on this little biplane. Cringe. D tier set. Same wave had Doc Ock Truck Heist. This shouldn't even be an Ultimate Spider-Man set, straight up. Doc Ock never robs a truck, and more importantly, this isn't even the design from the show. Boy, I sure do hope somebody got fired for that blunder. The minifigures are good, and the build is decent, even if it doesn't make a good Ultimate Spider-Man set. B tier set. Finally, for Wave 3, the Spider Helicopter Rescue. Okay, this entire wave was pulled out of thin air. Again, LEGO often makes up sets based on limited concept art for tie-ins, but this doesn't relate to anything at all. This is a massive failure on Disney's part for just straight up not giving LEGO enough to work with. The design for the Goblin Big Fig is really good. Like, it looks amazing, actually. The design for the MJ figure isn't good. Like, she does not wear a tank top in a single episode in the show. If you're gonna make an MJ figure for Ultimate Spider-Man, why not use her actual design? This set came out during season 2. Why did she not have a leather jacket in this set? And for Power Man, I don't understand why he's bald in this set. In other media, Luke Cage often has a shaved head, but in this show his hair is just short. The build for the glider is serviceable, but the helicopter is ugly as sin, and the play features barely work. This set is C tier because I like the Goblin and hate the rest. Now we move on to the final wave, released during season 3, final wave. Here's the Carnage Shield Sky Attack. This set is boring as shit. Miles Morales and Carnage don't even end up in an episode together, ever. The set also has the Super Jumper piece, which is the worst LEGO piece to ever exist. It's not even a contest. The Super Jumper is the worst by several country miles. First off, it is a pretty lame gimmick. All it does is spring up after you press down on, and it launches up in the air. It looks maybe kinda cool if you got a figure on it, but I think a little kid could maybe be impressed by this for a few minutes, but no amount of coolness could make up for this piece's true sin. Because the Super Jumper wasn't molded right. The little back part here was off by a margin of like a millimeter or 2, which is a lot for a LEGO piece. And because it was molded shittily, minifigures couldn't fit into it properly. Trying to insert them in would take a lot more force, and because of that force, the plastic of their legs would crack. Destroying a LEGO minifigure is a crime and a personal offense,
and I am fucking glad that it never took off and the super jumper was just dropped immediately from sets. The figures in this set are alright, and it's neat to have their first appearances in LEGO. Too bad the set is poopy-doo-doo shits. C tier. There's also this poly bag. I'm only talking about it for the sake of completeness, really, because it's listed online as part of the theme. It's a poly bag that, once again, sort of released between waves. It's a poly bag with Spider-Man, this cute little robot, and a super jumper piece. It's a fucking poly bag dedicated to the super jumper piece. I like the robot. It's cute. So because of that, I'm going to move it up from your mother's ashamed of you and you'll never amount to anything tier to F tier. Okay? Okay. The last set is Rhino and Sandman Supervillain Team Up. Lego Iron Spider. Pog as shit minifigure inclusion in a set that otherwise is one of the sets ever. This is the first ever Lego version of Iron Spider, Sandman, or Rhino, but Rhino has the fucking Amazing Spider-Man 2 design. Motherfucker looks like Lego Movie 2 Bruce Willis. The show's Rhino design would have been amazing as a big fig, honestly, but we didn't get that. Also, I love the Spider-Man figure that they use for all of these sets, because like it is pure simplicity from early like 2010s Lego minifigure design. A lot of modern Lego minifigures, I feel, are really over-designed in their printing, but this is just pure simplicity and bliss. The Sandman Rhino set actually had a Spider-Man with dual molded legs, which is like the only deviation from that one figure design in the entire Ultimate Spider-Man sub-theme. I can take or leave the build, and I like 3 out of 4 of the minifigures, so C tier set. And with that was the last wave of Ultimate Spider-Man sets, and kind of raises a lot of questions. Why were there so few sets? There were 8 sets in total, 10 counting polybags. LEGO Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles got 6 sets in its first wave. You'd think there would be a similar number of sets for probably the most popular superhero of all time, right? If Ultimate Spider-Man had more sets, LEGO would have been printing money. But they released a couple sets per year that barely related to the show at all. Hell, they could have had a thing in the first wave where the team is spread across different sets and you gotta buy the most expensive one to get the most popular one, you know? Meanwhile, in our timeline, we didn't even get a Lego White Tiger until after the Ultimate Spider-Man sub-theme was dropped for a broader Spider-Man sub-theme. So, why? Well, my brother Crystal, who helped check over my script a bunch and helped me edit this intermission, pointed out to me that Ultimate Spider-Man was a sub-theme of LEGO Marvel superheroes. It's his theory that the budget that normally goes to a whole theme was split between the sets for the movies, the animated series on Disney XD, and the occasional comic set. When you look at the broader LEGO Marvel Superheroes theme as a whole, it has a ton of sets, but it's split into a lot of sub-themes with a few sets each. This is perfect for the movies. A Mandarin go-kart to tie into a movie's release is the ideal source of cash, but the same approach suffers when applied to an animated series. So the LEGO presence of Ultimate Spider-Man is really lacking. I wound up getting quite a few of these sets when I was a kid. I had 5 of them. I missed out on both of the ones with Doc Ock and the one with Carnage, and all of the polybags. Sadly, almost every LEGO set I ever got before I gave up the hobby for a couple years has been disassembled and its pieces broken up amongst many plastic bins in my basement. Many pieces are lost forever, and a lot of pieces with stickers had their stickers peeled off. I could reconstruct the sets. I've put a lot of effort into sorting pieces to reconstruct a couple sets, including the TARDIS and a couple Ninjago sets and a ton of minifigures. But I'm not going to put that effort towards any of the Ultimate Spider-Man sets. Not a single one would be worth the time and effort to rebuild them, especially with all the stickers gone. None of these sets really look good on a shelf, aside from maybe the building from Daily Bugle Showdown. With that slightly disappointing venture into nostalgia done with, let's move on to Season 2. Season 2, Episode 1, The Lizard. The first episode of Season 2 begins with the team chasing Dr. Octopus. We get a reintroduction to all of our main characters, and already this episode has a kind of weird, pedantic detail that I really want to mention. Ock's hair is way too long. In episode 25, all of Otto's hair is gone. And then in this episode, it's back. But the funniest part about that mess of implications is that when Norman captured Otto and put him in a tank at the end of the Iron Octopus, Otto still had hair.
So this is implying that Norman shaved Otto bald out of spite. And then Otto somehow managed to regrow all his hair in the couple months between seasons 1 and 2. Then a bunch more S.H.I.E.L.D. agents show up, and Ock just runs away behind this crate in a warehouse, and they stopped chasing him. We find out that Ock was after a suitcase full of animal DNA samples. Dr. Connors asks Spider-Man to help run the lab testing, but he declines because the team have to rush home to meet May after she gets home from work. Peter talks to the camera about the issues of his family tripling in size, and we get the first cutaway gag of the series. Peter bemoans not being able to find any privacy to fix his web shooters until he remembers that Dr. Connors invited him over. We get a moment of Peter talking about how cool his shield tech is as he rides around the city on his spider cycle. He then talks about how cool Dr. Connors is as he works on fixing the web shooters. He talks about how he's always admired how cool Dr. Connors is, and that man was literally in 2 episodes of the first season. This whole little dynamic they have, I think, falls flat. Dr. Connors has also been recast. Tom Kenny no longer plays him, as he is now voiced by D. Bradley Baker. He's a great choice for the role. He has a great range for characters and is an absolute goat for animal and monster sounds. D. Bradley Baker also voiced Dr. Connors in The Spectacular Spider-Man. It's just phenomenal casting to have him as Dr. Connors. So Dr. Connors figures out that the syringes with clip arts of animals printed on them are animal DNA serums invented by Doc Ock. This show kind of laser focuses on Ock making like bioengineered stuff, biomechanical stuff, when in the comics most often he is associated with science in general, but particularly robotics because of his robot arms. Dr. Connors wants to use the lizard serum to regrow his arm, but Spider-Man points out that it's a terrible idea because Doc Ock experimentations always tend to be destructive monsters. Connors still pockets the serum while Peter triggers an alarm in the computer and blows it up. Spider-Man gets pinned under some rubble, and Connors takes a hit of the lizard juice and gets a lizard arm. Unfunny cutaway gag, I can sort of appreciate the art style, but yuck. Connors takes another hit of the lizard juice and just turns straight into the lizard. Connors speed runs through the descent into madness, which is sort of typical for the lizard, and Peter tails him into the sewers. Connors tries talking to Otto to get him to fix his mutation, but Otto makes the very good point that he has no obligations to fix the results of Connors taking a double dose of an untested serum. There's a fight for a while, and Ock and Spider-Man call a brief truce, retreading the same bad cutaway gag. The truce lasts for all of a minute as Otto betrays Spider-Man to get away. Spider-Man chases down the lizard in a bad cutaway gag instead of an actual chase scene, and there's a confrontation on the rooftop where the team finally shows up. Peter manages to make a cure for Connors, and he is rushed to the hospital. The team then gets back home for dinner. Overall, this episode is middling. It sets up the running trend of Ock being the villain of the season, and his genetic experimentation making bad guys. This episode has some pacing issues that would have been entirely solved by cutting out the cutaway gags and replacing them with actual scenes. Connors' transformation was far too little of the episode, and giving that whole thing the extra minute of runtime the cutaway gags took up in the second act alone would have gone a long way. They also make the transformation not his own experiment, which just takes the punch out of Connors becoming the lizard. It maybe could have worked in future appearances if Connors had more initiative in transforming himself, like trying to make the regrowth of his arm permanent, but he just becomes the lizard a couple more times in the show, all against his own will, which I think misses the point about the lizard. The design for the lizard in the show also upsets me. The monster design is dope, but he really needed the classic lab coat on top of that. He blends far too much into the dark backgrounds, too much with just his blue pants. I mean, the classic outfit on this body for the lizard would just be incredible. Otherwise, this episode is D tier, not a good start at all. Season 2, Episode 2, Electro. This episode begins with a brawl against Electro, voiced by Christopher Daniel Barnes, known for playing Prince Eric in The Little Mermaid, Spider-Man Noir in Shattered Dimensions, and Stripes in Sonic Underground. You may also note that he's the voice of Spider-Man and Spider-Man the Animated Series. And right here, we get the platonic ideal for this show's cutaway gag.
It's a minor visual element in complement to the exposition in the pauses. During the fight, Jameson announces on the TV that Daily Bugle Communications is getting a satellite to expand their news coverage past New York. Peter decides to pin Electro to a TV and zap him with taser webs. I don't understand why he thought this would work. Having electricity powers spawn from your body almost certainly leads to taser resistance. So Electro disappears and Spider-Man just fucks off. Back at the Parker residence, Peter is a little upset by everyone being on electronics. Why? I don't understand this writing decision. It's a boomer-ass choice. Peter wanting to hang out with the team for once and being upset they don't want to hang out with him would be really cool, but I'm still not entirely convinced these people like each other. But Peter is just saying, I'm starting to think smartphones are actually making us less connected. So Electro gets a massive upgrade when he becomes living electricity. He starts a blackout to extort the city for money. Sam is mad at Peter for Electro thanking him. Peter says, I already told you, when he very much did not tell them anything. They get chased around the city for a while by Electro possessing various electronics. The citizens of New York are upset by Spider-Man giving Electro an HD remake. The episode keeps going through the motions of Electro taking stuff over and chasing the team around. It's a lot of action centered on that stuff. The writers tried to bring back the stuff that distracted the team earlier in this episode via the stuff that was in the window displays in this scene, and it's just a bunch of boomer bullshit. They talk about how the flaw that they're having is not communicating, and they're not communicating because they're using their dang phones. I'm starting to think smartphones are actually making us less connected. The episode gets over this in the third act and pulls off some pretty clever writing. They introduce the idea that the more stuff Electro takes over, the less focused he becomes. I think that is an amazing weakness for a really overpowered character, and it very handily justifies him not doing anything on this scale in future episodes. They then trick him into plugging into the new Daily Beagle satellite to scather him to the point where he can't sustain himself anymore, and Electro is stopped when he's spread too thin. This episode has a lot of missed potential. The moral lesson about how smartphones are making us less connected or some shit just feels shoehorned in, doesn't fit at all, and the action is pretty repetitive in the first half, but I really love the ingenuity of how Electro is beaten. C-tier episode. Could have been A-tier if the first acts measured up to the third. It's actually kind of absurd how much better the last few minutes are than the rest of the episode. Like they gave the final act a second draft and not the rest of the episode along with it. Season 2, Episode 3, The Rhino. This episode begins with Spider-Man and Power Man on a rescue mission at the scene of a fire at a hospital. They are attacked by the Rhino. The Rhino is voiced by... It's complicated. I'm gonna get into that a little later. Peter and Luke then go to school when they see Flash doing the standard bully routine on a kid named Alex in front of the school building, despite his character development during the last season. Peter gets Flash off Alex and tries to comfort him, but Peter and Alex have met before and Peter didn't remember, which really insults Alex. Alex is upset by Peter being friends with Flash, but not really helping to change him and being a white knight, and he storms off. After school, Peter and Luke suit up and talk about this while waiting for a train to prevent another attack on Oscorp shipments by the Rhino. Rhino comes in to steal some serums related to animals, and the heroes manage to hold him off. He gashes Power Man's leg, despite that being impossible because he has unbreakable skin. So Peter searches all night for the Rhino after he gets away. This sleep deprivation doesn't factor into anything at all. So the next day, Rhino smashes Flash's car. Alex is smug about this, and he ducks behind a car to chug some delicious, nutritious Rhino juice. So Rhino runs around town and is trying to kill Flash. We see Flash Thompson's house, which is a gas station. Honestly, this visit to his house feels crammed in at the last minute. This episode tries to focus on Peter and Flash's relationship with Alex and how Flash being a bully still is affecting others. So it's a natural conclusion to examine what makes Flash like this, but barely any time and effort are put into it at all. This episode needed a rewrite where, first, they cut out the cutaway gags, second, axe the power bike and Spidey cycle race, and third, use that time to examine Flash a little more. The visit to his house feels like an attempt to cram stuff in that didn't pass the first draft. So there's a fight against the Rhino, Luke recovers from his injury miraculously and arrives in the speed of time, and Alex gets arrested for rhino juicing. This episode tries to do way too much. It's unfocused, and a story that focused on Flash more would have been better. Luke being taken out of the fight was really unnecessary. This episode is D tier. One more thing before I move on, though. You'd think that since Rhino and Alex are the same character, there would be one actor cast. However, it turns out that Alex and Rhino are voiced by two different people. The first of the two in the credits is Daryl Sabara, known for playing Rex Salazar in Generator X, Junie Cortez in the Spy Kids trilogy, and British Nerd in Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. The second of the two credited is Max Middleman, known for playing Saitama in One Punch Man, Ryuji in the Persona series, and Tarek in Where's Waldo, the animated series. The big thing that creates this confusion is that the cast list in the credits at the end of the episode lists Daryl Sabara and Max Middleman as Alex, aka Rhino. What's weirder, though, is that it's specifically in this one episode. In all of his future appearances, it's Daryl as the Rhino in both forms. Season 2, Episode 4, Kraven the Hunter. This episode begins with a fight between the team and White Tiger. Tiger is really angry during this training exercise, but it gets cut short when she goes feral after hearing some music. She fights across an outdoor eating area in Little Italy and eventually returns to lucidity, describing it as being in a white haze and the sound of drums. Shadowy evil bongo man. So cut to the next morning and they for real make a, well, that just happened joke. Ava is really upset. She starts being a slob and she talks about how she's had to put up with being the uptight one with straight A's, keeping the team on track, and she's fed up with it, and she's just decided to stop pulling that weight. Honestly, this is an amazing character shift, but it was really misplaced. This is a genuinely amazing advancement of Ava's character, but it's just undercut by, ha ha ha, girl burp. So the team gets captured by a villain, except for Ava, who's run off. Spider-Man goes to Nick Fury and tries to figure out the situation. This scene irks me for a number of reasons. First, why does this conversation have to take place in the principal's office? Peter can call Fury or Coulson anytime on his watch. Second, Peter talks to the audience, being upset about how he can tell that Fury and Coulson know things they aren't telling him, rather than him just calling them out directly. Calling them out directly would have been a little more interesting, at least. Fury explains Ava's backstory to Spider-Man. Her father was killed and she inherited the tiger amulet that gives her her powers. She's disciplined because the amulet gives her wild instincts that she has to take painstaking effort to keep in check, and now she's done holding it back. Finally, Peter finds the team in the park and we enter the villain, Kraven the Hunter. He hunted and killed Ava's father, the previous White Tiger, and he wants to hunt her too to take the tiger amulet. This new Kraven origin doesn't have much direct basis in the comics, but it tracks extremely well with Kraven's MO. His whole deal in the comics is, I've conquered the animal kingdom, so now I crave the most dangerous game. Man. Spider-Man. Like, it just makes sense that he's into hunting people with animal powers. On a related note, Kraven is voiced by Diedrich Bader, known for voicing Judah in BoJack Horseman, Batman the Brave and the Bold, among a whole lot of other Batman roles, and handsome movie actor Vance Ward in Phineas and Ferb. Kraven mops the floor with White Tiger and Spider-Man, and White Tiger is ready to kill him for killing her father. Peter tries to regroup and strategize, but Ava is too angry to think rationally. I love this scene. I really wish there was a lot more of it. Eventually, Kraven manages to swipe the amulet that gives Ava her powers. Kraven sends up a brutal assault with his new abilities and digivolves into a Tiger Man. Amazing. They manage to get the amulet off of him at the last minute. Peter manages to convince Ava to not kill Kraven. It's a really good place for Peter to come off as a little wiser and as a mentor to his team. Also, the perspective on this knife is awful. I think there was a layering error. It's really funny. This episode had a really shaky execution of some fantastic concepts. I love Ava's origin. It's a fantastic tying in of a more obscure character and Kraven, who is an iconic Spider-Man villain. But the main thing is that this arc for her in the episode doesn't stick. This episode talks up how Ava's diligence has been keeping her wild instincts in check from the amulet, and how keeping them in check has limited her, And that feels like a start to her living a life that's more balanced between restraint and freedom. But she goes back to the status quo next episode. Really, my biggest problem with this episode is that Ava's breaking character isn't brought on by something tangible. Throughout this season, we get episodes that focus on the members of the team, and they reinforce these characters' core traits by showing what causes them to break character. Honestly, I think that is the core of any good character exploration. Ava breaking character happens because of magic tiger amulet hormones. I think what could have been a great rework for this episode would have been if Ava was feeling haunted by something, paranoid when she sees things and hears things that remind her of when her father died, when Craven killed him. Like, those drums, that would have been amazing if it sent her into a panicked frenzy because that's the sound she heard when her father was murdered. This could then progress into her being less composed than usual throughout the episode, until Craven captures the rest of the team and she explains to Spider-Man that Craven killed her father. If that exposition came from Ava herself and Peter had to help her confront it, that would have been fantastic. In short, a more tangible reason for her change in behavior would bring this episode up a whole heck of a lot. This episode is C tier in execution, but S tier in concept. Season 2, Episode 5, Hawkeye. This episode begins with Spider-Man taking a trip down to New Jersey to check in on the construction of a new helicarrier under orders from Nick Fury. Suddenly, the Beetle attacks. He comes after Spider-Man once he spots him. He gets cornered only for Nick Fury to come in with reinforcements. Beetle flies away and we get introduced to Hawkeye. This character design is ugly. Thankfully, it is only used in this one episode. This outfit, I think, is trying to be a more stylized spin on the outfit for Hawkeye in the MCU, but red is just not the right color, and his hair looks like he pissed off his barber. Anyway, Hawkeye is voiced by Troy Baker, and he continues to voice him for the rest of the Marvel cartoons. So the Beetle broke out during the sinking of the helicarrier and is focused on revenge. Hawkeye's been put on guard duty for the construction site, and now Spider-Man and Hawkeye are going to capture the Beetle. There's friction between the two. They hunt down the Beetle and run into an ambush by a swarm of drones. I really like this bit of characterization for Hawkeye. He's grumpy and hates being made to babysit some punk kid, but he takes any opportunity he can to put this kid in his place by just showing off himself. So Spider-Man dodges a heat-seeking missile by running through an office building. The best damage is no damage at all. So during the chase, Peter's web shooter malfunctions and causes Peter and Hawkeye to get stuck together. Then a glue arrow explodes, causing the webs to get covered in glue, so the tried and true couple hours won't let the webs dissolve. This progresses through various stages of progressive misfortune, and I really like how it's written. The two lose the Beetle, which leads to them rushing back to Jersey. I love this bit with Cabby, especially when he refuses to go to New Jersey. In general, I just love how media taking place in New York just trashes on Jersey. It's like a requirement. So Beetle attacks them again in the helicarrier construction site. They manage to trick Beetle into cutting them loose, and they win the fight with Spider-Man launching himself like an arrow. Beetle is taken away, and the episode resolves with a humorous high five. I really like this episode. Hawkeye is a fun character in Disney XD shows, and this is a solid introduction aside from the costume. The conflict was really fun. There were some poorly placed cutaway gags. There were two back-to-back during the conversation of Fury giving important information, but that's the worst this episode gets. B tier episode. Could have been A or S tier with just a little bit of a rework. Season 2, Episode 6, The Sinister Six. This episode begins with the team in a training exercise. The rest of the team is fighting Spider-Man, and they're losing. The exercise wraps up when Peter gets urgently called by Dr. Connors at Doc Ock's lab, telling him to come alone. Or to not come alone, and the knot was buzzed out by static. Spider-Man tries to bring the team with him, but they're all busy. When Spider-Man arrives, Ock ambushes him with some reinforcements. Craven, Rhino, the Beetle, Electro, and the Lizard, making this universe's first incarnation of the Sinister Six. I have a few problems with this concept right off the bat. First off, it is way too early in the season to be doing the Sinister Six. Except for Beetle and Ock himself, each of these guys have only had one prior appearance, which kind of goes against the whole appeal of the Sinister Six. The Sinister Six need the room to breathe after introducing its members. At the very least, I think this should be episode 7. It also doesn't feel very big when they come together because we've seen these guys recently. The Sinister Six hit as a concept because we've seen them all before, scattered in various appearances. but we've seen each of these guys super recently. I feel like the Sinister Six should have marked the middle of the season, especially since there are 3 more episodes in this season that focus on the team, and having their character development come to a head in this episode would have been great. Instead, this episode comes off as really lukewarm. Also, another odd continuity thing, Electro was arrested and turned back from his power-up at the end of the episode, but now he's back to pure energy. So the fight starts and it is really bad. It's some alright action, I guess, but every 10 seconds is interrupted by cutaway gags establishing that these are in fact established villains that Spider-Man has beat before. But the problem is, they're already established. The whole point of having an overarching plot is that you don't have to reintroduce stuff over and over again. This episode I just think doesn't get that, so it just feels like a slog trying to set everything up again. So the comms are jammed and Spider-Man is cornered. I love how Electro laughs at Spidey's jokes, and the rest of the Six are just pissed at him. The Sinister Six manage to corner Spider-Man after he gets Connors separated off on his own to try and snap him out of his control. But Ock forcibly turns Connors back into the Lizard, and at that point, why did the rioters revert him back to human form in the first place? Ock uses an electroshock remote to subjugate him, and I just don't understand why Otto would think that's a good idea. Ock has become increasingly sadistic in this show, sure, but torturing someone to work for you is much more volatile than just giving them something they want as quid pro quo. It would make a lot more sense for Connors to stay as the Lizard and for Ock to hold something he needs to complete his transformation over his head. They could have an adversarial relationship, but with Connors having more agency, and I think that would have been a lot better. So Spider-Man manages to word his way into getting the Six to start a little slap fight, and he manages to escape to the pier. I love how the Daily Bugle just starts reporting on this seconds after it starts. Hilarious and iconic. Spider-Man hitches a ride on a Bugle helicopter all the way to the Statue of Liberty, and tells the team to meet him there. During the ensuing fight, Ock mentions how he perfectly chose each of the members of the Sinister Six to beat a member of the team, and that is some bullshit. This only really applies to White Tiger. Everyone can do something that's kinda similar to their supposed match, but they talk up a twist that really isn't there. Power Man fights Rhino because they're both strong. Nova fights the Beetle because they can both fly. White Tiger fights Kraven because they're both animal-based. And Danny fights Electro because energy, I guess. The solution is obvious. The team changes dance partners and they mop the floor up the Sinister Six, and Ock's plan falls apart. 5 of the Sinister Six are defeated, but Dr. Connors flees. They try to do this bit with an emotional ending. They flash back to a literal minute ago when Peter says, "I won't stop trying to save you," and Lizard says, "And you won't stop failing." This gets a little overshadowed by the next episode being the least serious thing in the entire world. This episode is really mid. The Sinister Six should have more gravitas than this. The thing that makes the Sinister Six is that they're villains who have had disparate appearances, each teaming up to fight Spider-Man. This really needed a lot more build-up than it got, and the cutaway gags constantly interrupting fight scenes turn some alright action into bad action. There are also some really weird editing decisions, like the chase with the Lizard that just has way too many cuts. This episode is D tier. Season 2, Episode 7, Spider-Man. This episode is about Boston, Massachusetts. Yes, Boston, Massachusetts, I am not kidding. This episode begins with Spider-Man being mobbed by New Yorkers after J. Jonah Jameson puts a $10 million bounty on unmasking Spider-Man. This is hilarious, but I don't like how outright evil it makes Jameson look, but it's hyperbolic enough that I can disregard it. Peter's week is already not going great. He has a ton of homework to do while his team goes on vacation, and May has to leave to take care of a relative who broke her arms at the exact same water park the team is going to. This gag is fucking hilarious. So Spider-Man sees in the newspaper that the mayor of Boston is offering him the opportunity to relocate there, and Spidey isn't enough of a huff to take him up on the offer. Spider-Man is given a warm welcome, including a Spider-Man limousine and a spider cave filled with spider gadgets, all made by this kid, Ollie Osnick. Ollie Osnick is voiced by Jason Marsden, notable for playing Max Goof in Goof Troop and the Goofy movies, Normal in the Garfield Show and the direct-to-DVD Garfield movies, Richie in Static Shock, and Spunky Spencer. Spider-Man turns down Ollie as a sidekick, and Ollie is really upset by this. One detail about this episode that I love is that the whole point of the invitation is that the press and merch sales of Spider-Man gives Boston a whole lot of money for public works. Thus ensues a montage of Spider-Man stopping criminals around Boston and being an absolute showboat. It's pretty easy for him because Boston notably has no supervillains. The next day, 3 supervillains show up in Boston. The Boston Terror Ears. They've got the Plymouth Rocker, Salem's Witch, and Slam Adams. These are the same guys that were in that montage earlier. These guys are all original characters as far as I can tell. Spider-Man deals with the supervillains, but they're brought back up by the Steel Spider. Of course, Ollie Osnick is the Steel Spider, and he gave the villains the new tech. After heart-to-heart, Peter realizes that he was way too brash and put Ollie down too harshly. Then Peter lets slip that there's a $10 million reward for unmasking him, and the villains come after him. I like the reconciliation between Spider-Man and Ollie in this scene. It's really wholesome. So Ollie and Spider-Man take down the villains with the buttons on their suit that lock their armor in place, that Ollie put in there as a safety measure. The Steel Spider then becomes Boston's superhero, and Spider-Man goes back to New York. I love this episode so much. It takes itself so unseriously that the comedy lands really well, but it knows when to get serious. I didn't fucking expect this from the Boston episode of all things, but it's an unironic S tier. Season 2, Episode 8, Carnage. This episode begins with Spider-Man out on patrol on a nice day, when suddenly, the Goblin! They fight around the city for a bit, but Gobby leaves Spider-Man under a collapsing building, and hints that he's going after Harry. Peter then hangs out with Harry and tries to talk to him, when suddenly, the Goblin comes in to stop Peter from changing the status quo in any interesting ways. The team shows up, fights the Goblin, and Peter and Harry run away. I like the sly uses of his powers that he gets in. I love it when characters with superpowers just use them subtly. It's something I really loved about Static Shock. As it turns out, Gobby isn't after Harry, he's after Peter. He kidnaps Peter because he wants him to be his son. So Norman's favoritism for Peter comes through and he injects Peter with the Venom symbiote, creating a surprisingly obedient Carnage. It's not really well established how Gobby is controlling him. I get a symbiote-enthused Peter would be going on a rampage, but obeying the Goblin is the last thing I see Peter doing. Also, Goblin has these stupid fucking hexagon screens. Negative infinity drip. If you want a tile screen, just put regular monitors next to each other, dumbass. He probably got these from a dumpster, and they're thrown out for good reason. So the team discusses Peter's secret identity within earshot of Harry, but he surprisingly doesn't hear them, and Carnage attacks, with Harry noticing him first. I love how powerful Carnage is in this fight sequence. He's a shrieking monster, and Peter's existing powers are being enhanced by the symbiote. The fight scene ends with the symbiote being pulled off of Peter and Harry reuniting with the symbiote. Yeah, Carnage is basically just a cameo in this episode. It doesn't really warrant being the title. I'm fine with Carnage not being really a major player in this series because logistically, Cletus Cassidy wouldn't work in the context of the show for a lot of reasons. They would have to pull a lot of crap to bring him in as Carnage to the point where it's a lot simpler to just have the symbiote. I mean, Cletus Cassidy is a serial killer. There's no way Disney would let them include that. Besides, they're already having Harry be Venom, so Carnage having a different host makes sense. It's also a bit of a draw on the ultimate version of Carnage, which was made by injecting Peter with Venom. So Venom and Spider-Man call a truce to take down Gobby together. Things go south when Venom is dedicated to killing Gobby. Peter suits down to talk to Harry, and Harry decides that he doesn't like how his ghoul pal is making him angry, so he puts a Venom in a beaker. Iron Fist suits up as Spider-Man, and the team shows up, and Gobby leaves after a quick attempted murder of his son. We get the running trend of a wrap-up with S.H.I.E.L.D., Venom is in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s custody, Peter gets his costume back, and Harry and Peter ride off to go see a movie. This episode is pretty good. Carnage is absolutely pointless here, though. He's just a Venom delivery system. This design for Carnage is also pretty bad. The stuff with Harry as Venom is pretty cool, even though it doesn't last. I really love Harry as Venom, but this show just really doesn't want to let that happen for more than one episode at a time. This episode was some good fun that was just executed kinda weird, and Steve Weber's performance is great. He really chews the scenery as the Goblin. This episode is B tier. B for Barnage. Season 2, Episode 9, House Arrest. This episode begins with Spider-Man fighting an E-list villain, Grizzly. He's a guy who uses a bear-themed suit to steal diamonds, and Spider-Man went after him, only for him to focus on how much distaste he has for the living situation with the team. The team shows up to help fight Grizzly. There's this moment where Spider-Man makes a quip, and it feels like they're about to set up for a cutaway gag, but they don't go for it. I guess it goes to show that if you're a big enough disappointment, the bare minimum becomes a little impressive. So the team ditches Peter to throw a party at his house without his knowledge. I fucking love this bit where Flash steals a lawn gnome. So Sam tries to turn off the shield security system for the party, but Peter butts in, accidentally turning the security system on high alert. Also, the security system in this episode is so implausible that I don't really know how I feel about disregarding it. This was not set up at all. Hell, they set up against this thing in Season 1, Episode 12, which was all about Peter being upset about having cameras in his house. The security robots could make sense, but the whole house transformation is just way too implausible. It also looks really ugly. Also, they fucking make an oxygen tank combust by Nova lighting it on fire like it's a propane tank. This doesn't make sense. This episode is almost entirely action, but I really love the character moments it has. Like, Danny gets trapped in Peter's room because he doesn't want to wreck his stuff to get out. I love it. The team brings down the security robot and the house just crumbles, but it's all good because S.H.I.E.L.D. just gives them an exact replica, and it turns out that the team is moving out. It turns out that the team was throwing the party for Peter because they're leaving. They then decide to have the rest of the night to have a little party with each other. The premise for this episode is hard to get behind, but the execution is really good. It's really hard to take S.H.I.E.L.D. just converting Aunt May's house into this death trap, but it's facilitated some of the best character moments in the entire series. Really, if they got rid of the metallic transformation and just had the security robots, this episode A would have looked a hell of a lot better, and the suspension of disbelief would have been a lot easier. It also would have been a lot more efficient from an animation perspective because the backgrounds for the Parker household could be reused later or reused from prior episodes. Another draft could have made this episode S tier, but it's still a very solid A tier episode. Season 2, Episode 10, The Man-Wolf. This episode begins with the team fighting Captain America and then the Juggernaut as LMDs in the new S.H.I.E.L.D. training room on the brand new Tri-Carrier. I seriously don't understand why this episode opens with establishing what life model decoys are. It's a Chekhov's gun that gets set up and isn't fired, which is straight up a poor writing decision. I feel like this was a scene from an earlier draft of the episode where the LMDs were important. So S.H.I.E.L.D. upgraded from a helicarrier to a Tri-Carrier. It's like the helicarrier, but it's got parts that split off that can go into space and the ocean. On the subject, a field trip to the moon comes along when J. Jonah Jameson asks S.H.I.E.L.D. to investigate whatever happened to his son, John Jameson, when communications to the moon-based satellite he works on went dark. I really love how the team is all super excited to go to the moon. The team suits up in their branded spacesuits and they enter the moon base to find scratch marks all over. Nova, Spidey, and Iron Fist run into John after White Tiger and Power Man split off. So they find John and he gives them a fuzzy recollection of what happened. What happened is Moon Werewolf. John Jameson is a Moon Werewolf. John Jameson is voiced by Nolan North, known for playing Nathan Drake in Uncharted, Marasmus in Team Fortress 2, and Krang in the 2012 Ninja Turtles. They look around the ship, find some gemstones that were uncovered by the people on the moon base while digging on the moon, and John turns back into the Moon Werewolf. They fight Moon Werewolf John and find out that touching magic moon rocks makes the magic Moon Werewolf. They keep fighting him some more and they rush out when the moon base collapses. Of course, the Man-Wolf attacks them on the way out. They fight the Moon Werewolf on the surface of the moon and put together that smashing the stone stops the werewolf. John Jameson is put in a tube and is never seen again. This episode is really mid. The climax doesn't feel climactic and the episode is extremely predictable. I feel like the writers wanted to make it obvious for the suspense factor, but that just led to me wanting them to get to the damn Moon Werewolf already. The episode ends with a hint to future places they'll bring John Jameson, the Moon Werewolf, but he doesn't go anywhere. This is his only appearance. This episode is really low B tier. The opening is fun enough to save the episode from C tier. I just absolutely adore how excited all the team is about the moon. Season 2, Episode 11, Swarm. This episode begins with a rampaging Juggernaut. Iron Man shows up to help Spider-Man out, and he leaves after Spider-Man's tracer fails to work. So Spider-Man shows up uninvited to the Stark Industries lab, where a disgruntled Stark engineer named Michael takes control of some machinery and trashes the lab with a new invention. Michael is voiced by Eric Bauza, known for playing various Looney Tune characters, including but not limited to Daffy Duck, Bugs Bunny, Pepe Le Pew, Marvin the Martian, and Elmer Fudd in various recent projects including Space Jam 2. Also Master Splinter and Rise of the TMNT, and Belly Bag and Uncle Grandpa. Michael is angry because Tony said that his new invention was not ready for live testing, and Michael proves his point by using his machinery to scatter his own particles all over the place. Tony gets to work trying to put them back together, and Spidey takes the time to use Tony's lab to tune up his tracers. So Spider-Man picks another fight with Juggernaut and uses his new tracer, only for it to replicate itself into a mass of mechanical bugs. They start swarming in Iron Man's lab as they've become possessed by Michael, who is now the supervillain Swarm. The perspective on this one shot in the hallway chase scene is really messed up. It's very funny. They figure out that they could counter-hack the tracers by going inside him and using the arc reactor to juice up the signal that Spider-Man uses to control the tracers. Swarm is destroyed, and Tony gets back to trying to help Michael again. This plotline is dropped entirely, and Swarm is just a villain that comes back a couple times. Swarm is normally a Hydra scientist who died, and now his mind inhabits a swarm of bees that nest on his skeleton. I think this guy is hilarious in the comics. He's just a plain stupid concept that I enjoy, and turning a Spider-Man villain into a guy with a grudge against Tony Stark is pretty lame, even if this episode did it before the MCU did. The effect they use for the swarming robots also just looks bad, and frankly, feels like nothing happened in this episode. Everything Swarm does later in the series could easily be rewritten into just a mass of machines controlled by a virus or something, or just any other supervillain. This episode is D tier. Season 2, Episode 12, Itsy Bitsy Spider-Man. This episode begins with the team scuba diving to look for Thor after he went missing. They find the destroyer armor under some debris and turn into these stupid-looking chibis that they use for cutaway gags. This episode is my personal hell. So after some testing and some mid-visual gags, they're sent to the S.H.I.E.L.D. daycare facility and meet an obviously Loki toddler. So Loki taunts the team and leaves, and Thor, also turned into a toddler, arrives. So the child-transformed heroes take on the destroyer armor, now possessed by Loki. Loki's plan in this episode is to use the Norn Stone to turn whoever touched it into a child, so he could turn Thor into a child and take his birthright by becoming the older brother by technicality. It's an interesting premise, I'll give it that. I won't give it anything else. Loki is using the destroyer armor to wreck stuff aimlessly and fight Thor. Everybody leaves the Tri-Carrier, they romp around the city for a bit, and then take the fight to a toy store, where they figure out that the Norn Stone will turn them back to normal and trick Loki into grabbing it, pitting his own trick against him. At best, this episode is boring. The jokes are unfunny and absolutely nothing happens. Loki's plan is turning people into children, but this is not how this show's art style draws children. Using the stupid fucking chibis just creates a dissonance between the intended plot, where they're turned into kids, and the cutaway gag art style they're using. This episode is saved from F tier only because Travis Willingham always brings his A game as Thor. D tier. Season 2, Episode 13, Journey of the Iron Fist. This episode begins with a very intense sparring match between Iron Fist and Spider-Man that is interrupted when a fog-summoning ninja attacks them. He hits Iron Fist with some poison, and the fight ends when Spider-Man webs him to an oncoming truck. Danny is then picked up by people from his home of Kunlun and leaves without explaining anything. Spider-Man chases him down, realizes the connection between Rand Industries and Danny Rand, and hitches a ride to wherever Danny is going. Rand Industries and him being a child of a CEO isn't really elaborated on at all in this series. When Spider-Man arrives, he's attacked by the Scorpion, voiced by Dante Bosco, known for playing Zuko in Avatar: The Last Airbender, Jake Long from Jake Long American Dragon, and himself deluded into thinking he's Zuko on the Nostalgia Critic Top 11 Best Avatar episodes. This is a very weird interpretation of the Scorpion. In his first appearance, Mac Gargan was a private investigator that Jameson hired to figure out how Peter Parker got pictures of Spider-Man. Jameson then funded an experiment that gave Gargan superpowers and turned him into the Scorpion. This version of the Scorpion just doesn't have a real name and was raised in Kunlun and became Danny's rival. Like, Kraven's origin changing makes sense because it's a simple addition that fits his MO. Meanwhile, this version of Scorpion is just weird. So Danny explains his origin. He was adopted by Kunlun and was meant to be its king, and he was to spend a year in the outside world to get his affairs in order. Danny joined S.H.I.E.L.D. and made friends with the team. Danny then succumbs to the poison that got into his system from the ninja attack and is blind, so he can't participate in his last trial for the throne, so he nominates Spider-Man to fight in his place.
So Spider-Man and Scorpion go through the trial. It's a foot race up the mountain with mystical tests of character. Between the poison and the moves, Spider-Man puts together that the assassin was Scorpion all along, as a magic snake attacks him because of the mystical trials. Scorpion gets to the supposed end and takes a crown. He's showered in gold and drowns in it, and Spider-Man saves him. Spider-Man is crowned the champion after Scorpion sits on the throne, because the Magic Mountain was a test of character, not physical ability. Danny shows back up and fights Scorpion, and he unlocks the ability to use his Iron Fist powers with both hands, not just his right. That's not a special power in other media, I don't think. Scorpion is exiled, and the Master grants Danny another year in the outside world. This episode is alright. It doesn't do a whole lot that blows me away, but it's solid. I like the trust between Danny and Peter. Scorpion is a paint-by-numbers character, and I feel like this reinterpretation of classic Spider-Man villain is less than the sum of his parts. This episode is C tier. With a better villain, it probably could have been B or A. Also, the unnamed Elder Monk character is voiced by George Takei, known for playing Dr. Sulu in Star Trek, and being a gay icon. Season 2, Episode 14, The Incredible Spider-Hulk. This episode begins with Spider-Man fighting Batroc the Leaper and complaining about publicity problems that are tossed aside for Hulk problems. Nick Fury is set on using Mesmero's powers to make the Hulk smarter so he can control himself better. This idea was planted in Fury's head by Mesmero. Spider-Man shows up to help, and he summarizes Mesmero's last appearance in an unfunny cutaway gag, and predictably, Spider-Man and Hulk swap bodies. This episode takes the bad writing of the previous Hulk episodes and the prior body swap episode to achieve bad episode squared. A boring sequence of havoc is wreaked by the body swap. Peter and Hulk's body accidentally lets Mesmero loose, falls out the helicarrier, and is met by the Thing. The Thing is voiced by Dave Boat, known for playing Thor in Ultimate Avengers, Alias in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, and Ruckus and Runk in the Chima 3DS game. Peter calls Ava to get Hulk and his body out of school. We then get a really long fight scene where the Thing gets brainwashed, and then it ends with Mesmero switching them back and the Hulk becoming smarter. The singular point of this episode was to set up for Hulk and the Agents of S.M.A.S.H. On top of that cardinal sin, this episode repeats the same unfunny, boring, and repetitive jokes of the prior Hulk episodes that weren't even good to begin with. F-tier episode. Worst episode in the series so far. Season 2, Episode 15, Ultimate Deadpool. This episode begins with Spider-Man monologuing about how he's having a bad day, when his talking to the audience is interrupted by Deadpool taking over the show. Deadpool is voiced by Will Friedle, known for playing Terry McGinnis in Batman Beyond, Ron Stoppable in Kim Possible, and Bumblebee in Transformers Prime. So Deadpool comes in to visit S.H.I.E.L.D. Turns out he was one of the teen heroes in the S.H.I.E.L.D. team, but he left before Spider-Man joined. Deadpool is trying to track down some guy who supposedly stole a database of S.H.I.E.L.D. secret identities. Spider-Man then decides to tag along to get out of training. I love how this episode uses cutaway gags in the first half. Cutaway gags clash with Spider-Man's style comedy, but it's a perfect fit for Deadpool. It also isn't just bad jokes, it's legitimate character details like him annoying Nick Fury and stealing a jet from Tony Stark. So Deadpool flies them to Taskmaster School for training villain goons to take him down and retrieve the list of superhero identities that were stolen from S.H.I.E.L.D. Things turn south and Deadpool shares his plans to kill people. They get the list back, and it turns out that Deadpool was the one who stole the file in the first place. Taskmaster swiped it, and Deadpool wants it back to sell it. This leads to a fight between the two. It's a lot of cutaway gags interspersed with actual beats of a fight scene. This is the least interesting possible resolution to this episode. They set up Nick Fury being wise to Deadpool's tricks, so this episode coming down to a cutaway gag duel is lame. This episode does things I really appreciate in the first act, but really slogs through the rest. Like, this episode establishes that Deadpool knew the team, but it didn't let any of them find out that their old friend is a mass murderer and was ready and willing to sell their secret identities. This episode had all the setup to something interesting, but instead we get a mediocre version of Deadpool and a bad resolution to the conflict of the episode. D tier. I would be remiss to mention, though, that Will Friedle's voice as Deadpool is great and really fitting for the character. Too bad the man just wasn't given a good script. Season 2, Episode 16, Venom Bomb. This episode begins with a fight against the Goblin, where the episode shows a big continuity error. Spider-Man says that the last time he fought the Goblin was the Season 1 finale, but the actual time Spider-Man fought the Goblin was earlier in this season. Boy, I sure do hope somebody got fired for that blunder. This error isn't even consistent in the same episode because the Goblin's plan involves the Venom sample that S.H.I.E.L.D. took at the end of the Carnage episode, which this episode ignores when recapping stuff.
So Gabi is restrained far too easily, so Spider-Man goes off to talk to Harry just to establish to the audience that he wants to find a cure for the Goblin, before 5 seconds later when he asks Nick Fury about plans to cure the Goblin. Nick Fury just wants to put Gabi on the moon base in solitary confinement and maybe find a cure later, but that's not gonna fly with Spider-Man. So he asks Doc Ock about Norman, only for Otto to freak out that Norman is on the Tri-Carrier at all. So Gabi spits out a bit of the Venom symbiote he had in his mouth and sends it to break out the sample S.H.I.E.L.D. had on them. The capsule should have been like the first thing they found when searching Gabi for weapons. For a spy organization, they lack a lot of procedures that would stop infiltrations, like an X-ray scanner in a universe where X-ray cameras are tech high schoolers can put together. So the Venom symbiote explodes and starts taking over a bunch of people on the Tri-Carrier. Spidey fights Venomed, Coulson, and then Fury. Then some mooks set free the Goblin. I like how this episode establishes why Venom obeys the Goblin. They're set on attacking him before his show of power. Spider-Man drains a generator trying to free Nick Fury, but Venom is too strong for that to work, apparently. His one weakness was established to be electricity, and it just didn't work. So Spider-Man grabs the Iron Spider suit and Doc Ock to make a Venom antidote as Gabi venoms up. Ock works on the antidote while Spider-Man fights venomed up Goblin. Ock whips it up after a good chase scene, and smashing one vial is enough to cure everyone on the carrier, including Goblin, turning him back into Norman. 2 for the price of 1, I guess? I mean, it sort of makes sense that would work on the Goblin, because it seems a lot of Ock's mutagenic stuff works on the same basis. Ock leaves on an escape pod after Gabi turns back into Norman, and leaves Spider-Man to stop the self-destructing ship and fight the Venom monster. He flushes Venom out of the airlock, and Fury stops to self-destruct. This episode is pretty alright. It's a fun premise, could use some tighter pacing, but it works fine enough. High B tier. Season 2, Episode 17. Guardians of the Galaxy. This episode begins with Peter and Sam playing video games and being told to stop to take out the trash. Sam ditches and Peter takes out the trash. I love this bit where Peter uses his powers to crush down some garbage. He then finds Rocket Raccoon eating from this trash. Sam breaks up the fight between them and leaves for something he might not return from. Peter tags along, and this sounds incredibly familiar. They beam up into a dogfight in space with this guy named Korvac. They're dragged into the ship by a tractor beam, but it's all part of Rocket's plan to break out the Guardians of the Galaxy. Nova was a part of the Guardians for a while. The rest of the team got captured as a part of a chant to stop the Chitauri from destroying Earth. We get brief introductions to the rest of the Guardians. Drax the Destroyer is voiced by David Sobolov. He's known for playing RoboCop and RoboCop Alpha Commander, Shockwave in Transformers Prime, and a lot of other Transformers characters. Gorilla Grodd in Justice League Action, LEGO DC Super Villains, and Legends of Tomorrow, and The Flash. David Sobolov is the only member of the Guardians of the Galaxy to not get recast at some point apart from Nova. All the other actors get recast in a future guest appearance in this or another show, or get recast in the Guardians of the Galaxy show. Star-Lord is voiced by Chris Cox, known for playing Glumshanks in Skylanders, Hawkeye and a lot of other minor characters in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and George W. Bush on Family Guy. He was recast in Gog Tass. Chris Cox also voiced Captain America in this one cutaway gag in this episode. Gamora is voiced by Nika Futterman,
known for playing Hawkgirl in DC Superhero Girls, and Styx the Badger and Sonic Boom.
Also recast in Gog Tass. Rocket Raccoon is voiced by Billy West, known for voicing Fry in Futurama, Professor Farnsworth in Futurama, Dr. Zoidberg in Futurama, Zap Brannigan in Futurama, Richard Nixon in Futurama, Leo Wong in Futurama, Smitty in Futurama, Lawrence Fillmore in Futurama, God in Futurama, and the Red M&M. He was recast in a second appearance as Rocket, most likely because he's a super prolific voice actor and was probably busy or something. Groot is voiced by the late Michael Clark Duncan. He played Wilson Fisk in Spider-Man the New Animated Series and the Daredevil movie, Atlas in God of War 2, and Benjamin King in the Saints Row series. Groot is one of the last roles he ever played before his death, being one of many that was released posthumously. Groot was recast in later appearances, but I'll touch on that later when we get to one of those appearances. The plot is that they're stopping the Chitauri ship from firing an antimatter ray to explode the Earth. Sam stops the antimatter ray, and he leaves with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and psych, no status quo change. This episode's plot isn't much. The Guardians all have a way too little screen time for any one of them to make an impact. Sam's connection to the Guardians is given far too little time for it to feel like anything at all. Anyways, this episode is D tier. Season 2, Episode 18, The Parent Trap. This episode begins with Spider-Man, Power Man, Nick Fury, and Coulson attacking a Zodiac base to stop them from making a super soldier serum. When they get into the base, they find that Zodiac has employed Luke's parents. Luke ditches the objective and goes to find his parents. Spider-Man joins him. Luke explains that his parents supposedly died in a plane crash when they were flying out of a S.H.I.E.L.D. research trip that was attacked by Zodiac. His mom gave him the only good sample of the super soldier serum they had, but Scorpio blew up the plane after abducting them. So Spider-Man takes the big important key and finds out that he should have never moved it because the base starts collapsing. Luke and Spider-Man find Luke's parents, but they don't know that Power Man is their son, so they're hostile. Scorpion comes in and he tries to take back the key. He calls it the most powerful energy weapon on Earth, when that is demonstrably false. Like your average Iron Man suit clears that thing by a mile. After Power Man takes a lava bath and erupts out, Scorpio takes a hit of an unstable and defective super soldier serum and keeps increasing in power. Scorpio tries to swim in lava and the family reunites. Scorpio is never seen again, so he might as well have died here. This episode is good. Luke's origin in Ultimate Spider-Man is a really big departure from his origin in the comics, but this works alright. This certainly works well as a revised origin for Luke Cage to fit him more into this universe. Of all the weird changes they made to establish character, I like what they did with Luke. I like how Luke finding his parents motivates them, and this episode has some great action. There's no gratuitous reestablishing of canon, and not a single cutaway gag. This is the first Luke-centric episode that really does him justice. It really shows off the principle of character writing that one of the best ways to develop a character is to show how they break their established character. This episode is A tier. Season 2, Episode 19, Stand By Me. This episode begins with Harry and MJ staying late after school to help Peter make up the chemistry labs he's missed, without a teacher present. Power goes out and the school janitor Stan tells them about a monster he's heard lurking in the halls. Peter thinks he's just being an old man and worrying about the S.H.I.E.L.D. security system, and on cue, Principal Coulson tells them all to leave because they can't really get much done with the power out. Slash marks then appear on the walls and Coulson disappears. Peter dances around in words for a bit until he finds an alibi to suit up as Spider-Man. After Spidey appears, they find that the monster stalking the halls is the Lizard, and he conveniently breaks Spider-Man's communicator watch. They follow the Lizard into the boiler room. He takes Harry, and they figure out that the Lizard is hiding out in the tunnels under the school. Spidey webs up Stan and MJ into a closet, but Stan uses a conspicuous laser cutter to cut them out so they can help. They chase the Lizard into the maintenance room where he tricks Spider-Man into helping him erase Dr. Connors' brain waves. This doesn't amount to anything. In his next appearance, Connors gets cured and his mind returns. Spidey knocks the Lizard into a wall, and S.H.I.E.L.D. comes in to help clean up. The episode ends with Stan revealed to be a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. This episode's alright. Stan being a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent is an alright twist, but I just don't understand Connors going to the school of all places. It's more than a stretch that he was able to make a brainwave machine out of equipment a public school would have on hand. Lizard stealing from Oscorp or even an established S.H.I.E.L.D. facility would have made more sense. If the episode of Stan Lee was really necessary, the episode starring him and the Lizard episode really should have been separate episodes. Harry and MJ feel like afterthoughts in this episode, just like the rest of the show. The execution is alright, but it's not a very good plot. This episode is C tier. Season 2, Episode 20, Game Over. This episode begins with the team training against a whole bunch of LMDs. Then some of them start fighting them with the intent to kill, as they've been taken over by the mutant Arcade. Captain America comes to the debrief only for Nick Fury to be revealed to be an LMD. The real Nick Fury comes in to give Captain America his mission, to go to Madripoor and stop Arcade before he can launch all the nukes. All of them. Spider-Man stows away on the ship to help Cap out, and Arcade crashes the ship, where they find Wolverine fighting LMDs at a warehouse. Wolverine attacks, assuming that Cap is an LMD, but he stops after his claws don't scratch the shield. That's a neat character detail. I like it. They fight some Hulks and some Red Hulks. Nothing too much to talk about other than that Arcade is voiced by Eric Bauza. The action in this episode focuses on Arcade sending them from level to level in a video game of life and death. This episode focuses a lot on Peter being a cool gamer, but this episode is made up of video game tropes that would be considered surface level and how do you do, fellow kids, in the year this episode released. Spidey takes the Sentinel that was used in level 3 and uses it to beat level 4, and the final boss goes down easily. Arcade stops hacking the nuclear missile codes, and the episode ends with this horrible gag. This episode is bad. I feel a lot of video game episodes of cartoons only ever demonstrate how out of touch the writers are. This episode wasn't interesting. I would have much preferred a plot with an LMD takeover and the team and a bunch of imposters, but instead we just get this crap. D tier. Season 2, Episode 21. Blade. This episode begins with the team going through a graveyard to pick up a special delivery under orders from Nick Fury. They fool around, spooking each other with the prospects of being in a graveyard on a Halloween night when they're attacked by vampires and get help from Blade. Blade is voiced by Terry Crews, known for playing Julius Rock on Everybody Hates Chris. Terry Jeffers on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and every character in Danganronpa, apparently. So Blade takes charge in the plan to defeat the vampires, and they box them all in, and Nova uses Energy Blast to defeat them. So they bring Blade back to the Tricarrier, and he and Fury explain that the plot coupon he has is half of Takamotep's Ankh. Dracula plans to use his Ankh to make his undead army immune to the sun. Blade then loaders off to grab the second half on his own, and I don't really understand why he's going for it. The thing is only dangerous when reunited. Bringing the two halves together just gives Dracula one thing to track down instead of two. Blade gets over his trepidations against the team joining him, and they go into the VIP room at the museum to grab the Ankh. It's weird how this room has the same futuristic look as the S.H.I.E.L.D. facilities. Something tells me there was something of a miscommunication between the storyboard artists, the background artists, and the writers. They grab the Ankh, but Dracula shows up to take it. Dracula is voiced by Corey Burton, known for playing Captain Hook in a lot of Disney stuff, Count Dooku and Cad Bane in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and the Pizza Monster in Jimmy Neutron. Dracula starts fighting the heroes. He starts hypnotizing people, and they say that reflective lenses make you immune to Dracula's hypnosis, when Power Man and White Tiger also have reflective lenses, but they don't stop the hypnosis. So Dracula hypnotizes the entire team and kidnaps them, and Spider-Man and Blade team up with Fury's specialist team in the next episode. This episode is all set up for the next episode. It does a good job of that, I guess. I really like the fight scene against Dracula in the end of this episode. This episode is B tier. P for Dracula. Season 2, Episode 22, The Howling Commandos. This episode begins with introducing the Howling Commandos. One distinction I want to talk about here is that there are two major incarnations of the Howling Commandos in the comics. In the 60s, the first incarnation was a team of US military soldiers formed in World War II. This team included Nick Fury Sr., the father of the modern incarnation of Nick Fury, as well as other World War II era heroes. The more modern version that this episode takes inspiration from is a S.H.I.E.L.D. team of supernatural monster-based heroes. This team has included a lot of characters over the years, including Blade, the Living Mummy, and Frankenstein's monster. Notably, Werewolf by Night features a lot on this version of the team, but he was never a member of the Howling Commandos before this. He's still never been on the team in the main universe. He's only ever been on the Howling Commandos in this version and on Earth 61610 during Ultimate End, which happened after this. He's been a member of the Midnight Suns, which is kind of similar to the Howling Commandos, but not governed by S.H.I.E.L.D. Midnight Suns are also kind of less one cohesive team and more a common name of several different teams. The Midnight Suns come together to deal with all sorts of big supernatural threats. The first one was founded by Doctor Strange to fight Lilith, and one of them was led by Morbius to stop the zombies from Robert Kirkman's Marvel Zombies universe from spreading to Earth 616, and etc. That tangent aside, let's meet the Howling Commandos. Werewolf by Night is played by Ross Lynch, known for playing Austin Moon in Disney Channel sitcom Austin and Ally, the florist in Muppets Most Wanted, and Jeffrey Dahmer in My Friend Dahmer. Idkantu the Living Mummy is voiced by Oded Fair, known for playing Ardeth Bay in The Mummy 1999, Dr. Fate in Justice League, Ra's al Ghul in Young Justice, and Jafar in Once Upon a Time. Finally is Frankenstein's monster, voiced by Kevin Michael Richardson, who plays a lot of other roles in this series. So right after Spidey finishes explaining what happened in the last episode, Dracula attacks, takes the Ankh, and leaves. That was quick. Dracula can't use the Ankh until sunrise in Transylvania, so the Commandos and Peter go see Aunt May to protect her because Dracula knows Spider-Man's secret identity by controlling his friends, and he likes going after people's loved ones as hostages. Blade then comes in and he has beef with Werewolf by Night, being that they used to be teammates. They set up some defenses at Aunt May's house, and then they fly to Transylvania in the monster truck, and I really can't help but feel this vignette with Aunt May was utterly pointless. All it really did was take up time. Meeting up with Blade could have happened on the roof of the Helicarrier, or at Transylvania if you really wanted to preserve the drama. Anyways, they go to Transylvania, fight Dracula, and save the team. Man-Thing shows up, he's voiced by a sound effects library, and they beat Dracula easily, but Idkantu steals the Ankh and wreaks havoc in New York City to get revenge against Fury because he resented being a member of the Howling Commandos. They take about 5 minutes to beat Idkantu by destroying the Ankh. This episode doesn't pay off the stuff from the last episode very well. Dracula is dealt with way too quickly, and the conflict with Idkantu isn't compelling. D tier. Season 2, Episode 23, Second Chance Hero. This episode begins with Peter having a game night with Harry and Norman. They set up that's a mission from S.H.I.E.L.D. to see if he's really cured, but I really think that's a whole lot less compelling than Peter just hanging out with his best friend and also being a little concerned that the goblin may not be really gone. After the game is over, Norman suits up as the Iron Patriot. He's acting as a superhero in a very villainous way. He takes in the Frightful Four after setting them up by pretending to hire them, I think. In the ensuing fight, he uses Spider-Man as bait. He then attacks Spider-Man while very calmly yelling about how he isn't the Goblin. After he helps stop a collapsing Jumbotron and actually starts being a better father to Harry, Spider-Man has decided that it's worth giving Norman a second chance. Fury orders him to bring Norman in, so Spidey goes to confront him to bring him in for questioning. Then suddenly, Doc Ock attacks with an army of Venom super soldiers. They fight the Venom guys for a while, and everything ends with Norman as a good guy. Octavius is still trying to crawl his way out of the shadows to kill Norman, and Harry is getting over his grudge against Spider-Man. This episode is poorly executed. There's way too many cutaway gags, and this episode rings pretty hollow when it's one of the last episodes before the two-part finale. If it came earlier in the season, then it probably would have driven home the idea better that Norman may be cured. It's really predictable that he's going to become the Goblin again in the finale, and the inevitable conclusion doesn't really create a whole lot of suspense. This episode is D tier. Season 2, Episode 24, Sandman Returns. This episode begins with Luke's parents working on things in Dr. Connors' lab. They're making changes while he's away, and Spider-Man is a little upset by that because it reminds him of how much he's been failing. The cages are putting Andy to use by having him dispose of hazardous chemicals. However, this goes poorly when he's given something flammable and starts belching fire. Spider-Man then makes it worse by webbing up his mouth, causing the entire lab to catch fire. Sandman is then freed in the ensuing chaos, and he puts out the fires. Turns out, S.H.I.E.L.D. has been putting him through rehab. His powers make him emotionally unstable, so they're training to help him control his emotions. Peter's all for helping Sandman reform, but the team is against it. They argue that he can be incredibly dangerous if he's allowed to roam free. Sandman is allowed to go on the field with a brand new containment suit to help limit his power and regulate his emotions, and they help out S.H.I.E.L.D. when Swarm attacks. This is a continuity error. Swarm was dead at the end of his debut, but he's back with zero explanation. Since this version of Swarm eats tech, he eats Sandman's suit. When he gets out of the suit, Flint becomes gleefully violent. Spider-Man is disturbed by this development, but he's still committed to trying to help Flint. So they go out for another night, only to be interrupted by Batroc the Leaper. Flint gets progressively angrier as Batroc trash talks him, but he gets under control only for J. Jonah Jameson's commentary to send him into a frenzy, affirming all of the things that Spider-Man feared. He decides that he doesn't want to put in the effort of being good. Flint starts rampaging across the city. After giving Flint a lot of opportunities to stop, Spider-Man tells Nova to grab Andy, and Andy vores him. This episode is pretty good. Peter giving Flint the opportunity to change and him not taking it in the end is the kind of tragedy of failing to help people that defines Spider-Man. The reason he never kills his villains despite them all being harmful is the hope that they'll change. This episode explores that well, and I really like how it does it. This episode takes itself refreshingly seriously. It also just has a good use of setup with Andy, and aside from my nitpick with Swarm, this episode doesn't really have many glaring flaws. S tier. Season 2, Episode 25, Return of the Sinister Six. This episode begins with Spider-Man chasing a suspiciously armored-up lizard through the sewers, complete with gratuitous explanations of continuity, bad cutaway gags, and help from the Iron Patriot. While trying to help Spider-Man, Norman solders a wooden beam to a stone wall to support debris from a collapsing well, and they find a formula written on the wall for a cure for Dr. Connors' lizard transformation. They also find that Doc Ock gave the lizard his new armor, using Oscorp tech no less. The team and Norman then respond to a breakout at Rikers Island Prison, where the Sinister Six appear, all with robot suits. First off, tech modification of villains is cringe. Like, what the hell does Electro benefit from having a suit of armor? So everyone fights their villains, and Norman takes charge as a very terrible leader, like telling everyone to go after the villains that were chosen to counter them. Also, Scorpion's now in the Sinister Six. Okay. The Sinister Six gets the upper hand on the team and enacts revenge by turning Norman back into the Goblin, miraculously summoning back his old costume instead of Gubby being in a stretched-out Iron Patriot suit. Spidey manages to cure Dr. Connors, and Norman takes down the rest of the Sinister Six, and finds a lot more Goblin serum in Ock's suit, so he kidnaps the team and jets with the serum. This episode was really unnecessary. Much like their first appearance, the Sinister Six isn't well executed at all. All in all, it just felt unnecessary for this plan to include anyone other than Otto getting his revenge on Norman. Those Venom soldiers from 2 episodes ago could easily keep the team at bay for long enough for Otto to use the Goblin serum on Norman. But instead, those Venom soldiers never show up again. Like, they seem so useful, but they're never used aside from that one episode. This episode is D tier. Season 2, Episode 26, Ultimate. This episode begins with Spider-Man chasing down the Goblin when he finds Gabi hanging out in the old shield helicarrier, converted into a goblin machine to gas the whole city with goblin gas, turning the whole city into an army of loyal goblin soldiers for Gabi's world domination plan. He's even got the whole team turned into evil goblins with ripped costumes and green energy blasts to boot. I love the evil plan. It's super over the top. No notes on the concept, but how the hell did Gabi do all this? No time frame was given for how long he's been gone, but reconstructing the helicarrier took months. Fixing up the old one under S.H.I.E.L.D.'s radar and entirely underwater should take a little bit of time. I would have liked if they actually gave a nod saying it took like 2 weeks or however long. The Goblin team fights Spider-Man for a bit, and he gets picked up by Coulson and gets given an anti-Goblin serum thing. Spider-Man confronts Gabi all on the helicarrier and decides instead of using it to stop Norman, he uses it to save his team. He splits them off into their own individual rooms, and we get these brief little I know you're in there somewhere fights. It's a fun trope, and I love how the pep talk is ultimately a distraction for the cure to get into their system and not the thing that saves them. I also like how in all of them, Spidey talks to his team about their character development in this season, except for Nova, and he's just like, hey, remember that time we saved the Earth from aliens together? That was pretty epic. You should stop being evil. So the team gets back together again, and they launch a counterattack on the Goblin, stopping his Goblin missiles, saving the day. Except for one. Goblin tries to escape. He sets up a dilemma where Spider-Man has to save Ava or let the city get gassed. But instead he's like, you do know that one of my defining abilities is the ability to grab stuff at range, right? Spider-Man grabs the Goblin, and the gas container sinks into the water. We wrap up the shield for the last time this season, and Connors says it's gonna be a challenge to cure Norman again. Fucking how? You literally just made enough cure for 4 goblins. Just make the same formula again, dumbass. Degoblinizing Norman is a total non-issue at this rate, but the show just really wants to pretend that it is. After that, Spider-Man heads to Fury's office and is offered a place on the Avengers in the next season. This episode is pretty good. Goblin's plan is delightfully crazy, even if it makes no sense that it's even possible. Frankly, I would have preferred it if they went all out and made this story a whole 2-parter. A-tier episode with S-tier potential.
Alright, it's time for some final thoughts about Season 2, and really the show in general so far. Season 2's level of quality is really different from Season 1. Not in the way that it's noticeably better or worse, but more in the way that I can see some really great concepts that just fell short in execution. And seeing a failure in execution like that is more heartening to me than seeing a bad idea get fully produced. Many of the problems I have with this show as a show about Spider-Man persist in some capacity, like the jarring lack of focus on Peter's personal life and friends beyond how Harry Osborn gets involved with the Goblin's plots, really. Season 2 still uses a fair amount of cutaway gags, which, while my hatred for them in Season 1 knows no bounds, the writers in this season lean on them a lot less for comedy than in Season 1. I feel like they end up deriving a lot more humor from character writing, which I still think is one of the show's best bits of glimmering potential. There are also a few shining moments where dramatic tension isn't undercut by a joke, which is another thing that really inspires confidence for me in this show. Season 2 still makes plenty of jarring decisions in adapting Spider-Man characters, but the Goblin and Doc Ock are fantastic in this show as always. Honestly, if this show were completely different, I'd still want Tom Kenny as Otto Octavius and Steve Weber as this monstrous version of Gabi. One problem in this show that I don't think I gave enough press is that the considerations for a villain for a team of characters is very different for the considerations of a villain that acts for a solo character. So when you put Kraven against a team of characters, he's kind of poised as hyper-competent. Character I think did the best job of going from a Spider-Man villain to a villain for a whole team is Electro. And him being beaten at the end of his episode teaches him that taking on that much power exposes a huge weakness. Honestly, I think another solo episode for Electro in this show would have rocked. Also, some more time to reflect on the season as a whole. I think the big thing that could really help legitimize the Sinister Six as a threat in this show is if their first appearance was a 2-parter. The beginning could have Ock breaking out Kraven, Rhino, Electro, and Beetle out of prison and capturing Dr. Connors, when all of that stuff happens off-screen, even though it could really be its own episode. My biggest gripe with a villain in this show has to be Venom. The more I think about this show's version of Venom, the more conflicted I feel about it. One thing I realized at this point is that making Harry into Venom is kind of just a way to have similar character dynamics to Spectacular Spider-Man, where Peter has a large supporting cast and is personal friends with Eddie Brock. Making Harry into Venom gives Harry and Peter a relationship that's really similar to Spectacular's version of Eddie and Peter, while also cutting down on Peter's supporting cast from a pretty large thing in Spectacular and the comics to basically just Harry, MJ, and Aunt May occasionally. Honestly, I feel that this version of Harry Osborn has a lot more in common with spectacular versions of Eddie than most versions of Harry Osborn in terms of personality. In this show, they have the sort of relationship that's strained by Peter keeping his secret identity, and I think Harry as Venom could work really well in this show if they just let Harry be Venom for longer, frankly. The more I think about it, it's really obvious that Harry just wasn't allowed to be Venom for very long in this show. He starts using the symbiote to be a copycat Spider-Man in season 1, and then he starts becoming full-on Venom as the symbiote makes him more aggressive, and after like a week of having it, he's full-on Venom. Then Harry gets a temporary cure, and the symbiote goes dormant until the finale, where it wakes up basically just to grab a fuse box and accidentally get shocked off of him, and for a goblin to slurp him up into a tube. Then Norman injects the symbiote into Peter to make Carnage, which is, again, basically just a Venom delivery system for Harry to be Venom again for about 10 minutes, but then he gives it up at the end of that episode, and it's straight up the end of Harry being Venom for the entire show. They keep using the symbiote on its own from then on, as if it's just as interesting as the character relationships between Spider-Man and Venom. When removed from that, the symbiote is just a pretty generic bad guy if you think about it. They also make this version of the symbiote straight up override people's will in a lot of circumstances, which really goes against what I think makes the symbiote work well. Venom shines because he can be either a nemesis to Spider-Man or, after some character development, a rival. With such little time in the spotlight, Venom can't be what he is at his best. He's kind of just a recurring threat, when Venom's strength as a character is something that can easily drive several arcs in the show. From the black suit arc, to the symbiote galvanizing hatred for Spider-Man and one of Peter's friends that creates Venom, to a redemption into a hero. Not to mention the fact that Venom just isn't a good name for the symbiote without the context of the character's origins. The symbiote and the host together are the perfect conflict for both sides of our main character. They are poison to both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Together, they are Venom. I really wish we got more of Venom in this show because Venom really has a lot of potential as a character, and I think this show had the wherewithal to make something really good out of it, even if it didn't wind up doing that. Really, I think that's a good microcosm of the entire show. Season 2 helps Ultimate Spider-Man find its merits in its own way. The team feels a heck of a lot more fleshed out after Season 2 than they did at the end of Season 1. In the first season, about a third of the episodes didn't feature the team in any capacity, or only really in a minor role. And while we had some episodes in season 1 that focused on Luke, Ava, Sam, and Danny, their inclusion could still wind up feeling a little lacking in episodes they featured in. Meanwhile, in season 2, each member of the team gets a featured role in at least one episode that gives them major character development. Each of these episodes, I think, tries to reinforce these characters by showing what drives them to break their established traits, or at least challenge their established traits. A great way to explore a character is to examine what is normally true for them and introduce something that challenges their ability for that to still be true. The writers obviously didn't do it perfectly, but I still think the idea was there. Ava's change in behavior was framed as a result of her amulet and not her own circumstances. But if it wasn't, it really could have been something interesting. Danny wasn't really challenged by his circumstances very much, and Sam took a major backseat in this episode, though it did show a more focused side to him than normal. Luke's episode, I think, is the best because it challenges his main trait with his main trait from a different angle. Luke's episode is the epitome of this kind of character progression in writing, because he has to choose between his loyalty to S.H.I.E.L.D. and the mission and to his parents. And the best thing is that Spider-Man immediately backs him up in helping save his parents. Really, the core of all these issues in the show around character development is that Peter is the only perspective character of every episode. We have other protagonists, but the show never has a single episode where another character is the main protagonist. Peter is the one that has to talk to the camera and start cutaway gags up, so the barest thing we are allowed are cuts to villains to establish dramatic irony. Every story beat for the protagonists has to come from Peter's perspective, and that makes our main characters feel underdeveloped. We never get enough time out of Spidey's head to be able to develop the rest of the cast properly. Steven Universe had a similar prevailing criticism, where nearly every episode was only Steven's perspective. Ultimate Spider-Man has the same flaw to a worse extent, I feel, because in Steven Universe, the Steven-only perspective served some purposes. It limited information to help develop overarching mysteries, and we had a whole lot of short episodes to know the rest of the cast, while nothing was really going on advancing the plot. Meanwhile, USM's Peter-only perspective makes him too important to other people's stories for them to feel like they are stories for half an hour. He has to be the main character helping the side character with their backstory, not a side character to them in that moment. I think a show that does what I want this show to be doing very well is Batman the Brave and the Bold. Batman is a central character of the show, but he isn't always the main character. A lot of episodes give time to focus on the perspective of another character that teams up with Batman in an episode. This lets episodes of Batman the Brave and the Bold be episodes for another character, rather than a Batman story with them as a guest star. You also see this in team-focused superhero shows like Teen Titans and Earth's Mightiest Heroes, where the team members are all main characters, but they have episodes where they get the spotlight. I think if Ultimate Spider-Man took either approach, not only would the rest of the cast feel deeper, but I think Spider-Man would probably also feel deeper because the audience can see how other characters see him. All in all, I think Season 2 was an improvement in some respects, but it really didn't cure all the show's issues. Many of the things I pointed out in my reflection on the first season still hold true. Ultimate Spider-Man is still a far from perfect Spider-Man show, but honestly, I think it's kind of shaping up to be a better show overall, even if it still has a lot of problems. Season 2 is a long way from perfect, but I feel a lot of promise here. Promise for more character-focused episodes about the team, and for these characters to come together. Promise for a show that, while it stumbled a little, could stand on its own feet, as a good show in its own right, even if it wasn't a great Spider-Man show. If this central team kept being built up throughout the next seasons, Ultimate Spider-Man could have been something amazing. Notice how I was using hypothetical language there? Because that's not the seasons 3 and 4 of Ultimate Spider-Man that we got. I've done my research and I've watched seasons 3 and 4. Man of Action left Ultimate Spider-Man after Season 2, and I think that in Season 3, the new writers kind of just did their own things, which I think winds up running into a lot of the same problems as the first 2 seasons, and a bunch of entirely new problems come in that just frustrate me. Man of Action worked on Avengers Assemble, and that most likely was after they left Ultimate Spider-Man for good. They kept moving on to different projects afterward. All in all, Ultimate Spider-Man is a show that, in its first 2 seasons, showed a lot of promise, but really fumbled it. Call me blinded by nostalgia, but I think there is potential in this show, for real, and it saddens me that this show never really got to live up to what it could have been. I guess we'll just have to see where the ride takes us from here, and try to find something to take away from all of this next time. Welcome everyone to the outro. I'm going to talk about some personal things about this project, so stick around if you want to see that. So I've been working on this video for a while. The Google Doc for this script was first made in August of 2022. If things go according to plan, this video is coming out in December of 2024. It didn't. To put that 2-year time frame into perspective a little more, I talked about the Ultimate Comics a lot in this video, and I didn't specify that I was talking about the original Ultimate Comics from the 2000s, because Marvel's new Ultimate Universe wasn't even a glimmer on the horizon when I was originally writing those lines. On a similar note, Marvel Rivals has come out since, and quite a few voice actors in the game reprised their roles from the Disney XD universe. This includes Fred Tatasciore Hulk, Troy Baker's Loki, Liam O'Brien's Doctor Strange, Steve Blum's Wolverine, Laura Bailey's Black Widow, and Travis Willingham's Thor. I think it's pretty likely that we'll have more examples of this in the future. There's also a brand new Spider-Man show with Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man on Disney+. It's not connected to the Disney XD Marvel Universe shows at all, so I'm not going to cover it unless y'all really want to hear what I have to say, and I have something that I really want to say about it. I wanted to get this video done a lot earlier than this, but I kept pushing the deadline back further and further because of executive function problems that kind of went supernova after I graduated high school, and only really started to calm down after I got ADHD meds. I also faced some other mental health issues, and also I have college, a job, and a general life outside of making this thing that caused it to get delayed a lot. You might be able to tell the places where I either re-recorded lines or recorded some lines probably months apart, and also being at various stages of giving up and trying at voice training. Thankfully, I know a lot of the issues that made this video take so long, and hopefully I can correct the things like having a really disorganized file setup that made everything load super slowly and be hard to navigate when it did load. So hopefully I should be able to get more done by correcting those problems, so when I do find time, it's less to manage. I'm hoping to get it done sometime this year. The script is like 2/3 complete, so it might be manageable, especially if I fix my productivity issues. But at one point, I plan to release the video you are currently watching before Insomniac's Spider-Man 2 came out, so I'm not going to hold my breath on my ability to get this all done under a certain time frame. Just 2025, let's hope for that. If you're really excited for that possibility, for free, you can like, comment, and subscribe. Keep up to date with this YouTube channel. If you really feel so inclined, toss me a few bucks on my Patreon or Ko-Fi, which I'll link in the description once they're set up. I have a lot of creative pursuits that I want to do in my future, on this channel and to the side of it with stuff like a webcomic that I'm working on. So if you feel so inclined, just a few dollars would go a long way. I'm on social media as PinDaGreat on Blue Sky and Tumblr, and the links to those will be down in the description. Last things, I want to give some thanks to some people who helped make this project possible. First, my brother, who goes by Crystal online. He does some great VeggieTales animations, and he was a massive help in this project. He helped me double check all my scripts, helped me research things like the intro where I talked about the history of Spider-Man cartoons, and just a whole lot of stuff like that. Links to his socials and YouTube channels are in the description. Such a massive help, truly. I also want to give my thanks to my friends and family who have been very supportive of me while I've been working on this and talking their ears off about it for ages now. Thank you all so much. I will be just as, if not more annoying about the development of Part 2. And last up, of course, thank you all, the viewers, for watching.